Terry, I told you 100 sticks of gelignite. 50 isn't enough to blow out a candle, let alone crack open that bunker door. And why is it sweating? I told you I don't like sweaty jelly. You'd think you'd know better after that Egyptian job went tits up.
Oh hi, welcome to the Christmas episode of the 42 to Doomsday podcast, Australia's least prolific yet longest running Doctor Who podcast. After the raging success and interest surrounding our previous episode, Unleash the Hoarder Indeed, I've resigned from work, turfed my family, and am now devoting myself wholeheartedly to excavating this unbelievably fascinating site. Call it the Doctor Who equivalent of Oak Island Syndrome. If only I could find a skull with a pentagram carved into it. That power would set me above the...
Terry, tell that fool in the excavator not to run over that pile of blue film cans. There's gold in them, Terry. I don't care if they're stamped return to Nigeria. They're mine now. What? The scaffold? Fuck the scaffold and the chocolate eclair, son. I'm talking real quality. Measure the length and feel that width.
Anyway, because I'm on site, in an underworld you might say, managing tunnelling operations, negotiating underground access rights with the local Silurians, Terry managed to wake up, cracking open bunkers, tossing my salad with the vinegar, and disentangling piles of reel-to-reel tape, I can't make this latest episode. However, Mark, Richard and Dave will be taking you through the following. The lads discuss the death of Chris Boucher, that legendary writer for Doctor Who and Blake 7. They also go in-depth with the power of the Doctor, especially from Richard's perspective, and all that Disney cash. They then jump into the convention anecdotes, good and bad, in their experience in Australian conventions. And then they look at Target Book Club, especially with reference to Daleks. And finally, that fan favourite, Fanwank of the Year Award 2022 style.
For the love of God, Terry, the X-rated porn on the beta tapes goes in my car. My car, I said. There are collectors who pay top dollar for smutty beta. Marilyn Chambers is still hot property, for God's sake.
Hang on, who's that fellow waving at us from the top of that cliff?
What's he talking about, Terry? Something about a dynamite plunger?
I'm Mark.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Richard. And welcome back to this 8th annual 42 to Doomsday staff Christmas party. How are we, guys?
The scary thing is that 8 years is only a fraction of the time we've known each other.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm well, thank you, I'm well.
And you, Richard?
Yes, great to be here as always, Mark.
Well, last time we got together was in August.
I had the pleasure of listening back to that on the bus trip from Gallipoli back to Istanbul.
Show off, yeah.
My condolences. Very good. There's a bit of a Rob-shaped hole in the room again. Rob is still in the Hoarder's house looking for Power of the Daleks. He wants to maintain his record that he's found more Power of the Daleks than Phil has. So he's still there. He'll be dropping in by the time capsule, a la Three Doctors style, or Seance, whichever one works better.
Congratulations to you guys on that episode, and Aaron as well. That was a very, very enjoyable episode, which, just looking at social media, made some waves right across the planet.
Yeah, it did.
Not all of them factually accurate.
Thank you, everybody who sent us feedback on that episode. And look, end of the day, we just basically pressed the record button, let Aaron chat about what was going on there. In the shop, he was getting phone calls from people in Canada, UK, about the collection that he'd obtained, and would he like part with it. And it was actually quite a little bit overwhelming sometimes when you're looking at your phone, you've got like 40 or 50, 60 notifications going on, and you know, certain big names in fandom were definitely reaching out. So yeah, it was
Wow.
quite humbling. Yeah.
We should probably point out as well, if you're somebody who discovered 42 to Doomsday with that episode and you had a very factually insightful, sometimes a moving, sometimes touching story about this situation, very, very serious. That's not the vibe today.
No, not at all. We're going back to regular programming, I think you'd probably be safe to say. And unfortunately, we start off with a bit of sad news. News came through this week that the last remaining 70s Doctor Who writer had passed away, and that was Chris Boucher. So Chris Boucher obviously wrote one top shelf Doctor Who script, i.e. Robots of Death, one great Doctor Who script, Image of the Fendale, and one, not too bad, Doctor Who script, Face of Evil. But of course, Chris Boucher is known for his work on that awesome series, Bergerac.
Yes. And the bill.
And the Bill, and
Juliet Bravo.
And Juliet Bravo, and Shoestring.
I'm going to go with Starcops, but yeah, go on.
But all jokes aside, his work on Blake 7 is what he's best known for. So, of course, with me, I've got the two co-hosts of the fantastic Blake 7 Spacefall with me. So, let's have a quick talk about Boucher's work on Doctor Who and also his legacy on Blake 7 as well.
Well, I'll probably start by saying your ranking of the stories, I'd probably swap Face of Evil and Image of the Fendale,
Really?
maybe, but...
Probably would as well, but I think they're all top shelf. Look, Robots of Death is a top 5 Doctor Who story.
Yep.
I think that is just superb Doctor Who. But the others, I think, are both classics. They're both very, very well written.
I think for me, with Face of Evil, the direction's a little bit
That's
okay.
That's probably fair. I mean, the script for The Day God Went Mad is exceptionally clever, and that's the mark of Chris Boucher.
Yeah.
But having written 3 very, very strong Doctor Who scripts,
Absolutely.
having created and then really developed the character of Leela,
Yeah.
and let's face it, if you want to have your character really well written and developed, having her first 8 episodes written by Chris Boucher, and then the next couple by Terence Dix and a couple more by Robert Holmes, is a pretty good way to start compared to, say, having your first dozen episodes written by Pip and Jane Baker, as happened to somebody.
Yeah, imagine poor old Leela's first story would have been Underworld, poor thing. Yeah, oh God. Yeah.
But yeah, look, we all know the story that he then got picked up. Dave Maloney started as the producer of Blake 7 and said to Robert Holmes, "Hey, come and be my script editor." And Holmes said, "Look, I've just done the best part of 4 years on Who. I'm burnt. No, but this Chris Boucher guy is awesome." And
Go and talk to him. Yeah.
And look, I mean, we can go into a bit more depth, but if you ask the question who had the biggest influence on making Blake 7 the exceptional TV show it was, I think there are 2 contenders, and one of them is Chris Boucher,
Yep.
and the other's Paul Darrow. But the fact that those 2 worked so well together and so in sync together,
And Boucher really is the one consistent element behind the camera. All the way through. On Spacefall, we even have a segment called "What Cool Lines Did Chris Boucher Give Avon This Week?" So it shows his skill with dialogue and crafting great stories.
And that's the thing you see right from Robots of Death. That opening scene where all the crew of the Sand Miner are just sort of kicking back in the lounge, and you quickly work out what sort of people they are, what sort of civilization they are. You get this idea that one of them is a bit of a joker, one of them's a bit of a boring old man. One of them is the slightly chip on the shoulder commander. One of them's a bit of a toff. You realise really quickly what sort of characters these are. When he gets to write his own Blake 7 scripts. Some of those first ones, something like Shadow and Weapon. Now, look, neither of them are classics, but they're both
solid,
just full of line after line of really good dialogue.
One's certainly better than the other, shall we say?
One is better than the other, and that's probably down to the director.
But you're right, and look, really, by the end, you sort of have that initial block of Terry Nation written scripts, but by the midpoint to end of the second season, Blake 7 is Chris Boucher's show.
Yes. Terry Nation, bless him, had their reputation, especially on Dalek Master Planet, as basically giving a napkin, say, here you go, expand this out. And I'm pretty convinced with Blake 7 that was, apart from the first season, Boucher did 90% of the heavy lifting on the rest of it. I
suspect by the time we get to episodes like Bounty and Deliverance, there is probably more Chris Boucher and less Terry Nation, shall we say.
Yes, as we discussed on the podcast, that was more to do with the production schedules of the time.
For sure.
And literally
Terry Nation admitted he'd run out of ideas. But
Look, he did, but he also said, look, you can have a second draft of episode 12, or you can have a first draft of episode 13. Which do you want? And I think it was probably the same with Dalek's Master Plan. When you're writing that many episodes in that small amount of time, you can either have really good second and third drafts of the first episodes, or you can have a workable first draft that the script editor can work on. And I think it's probably a little bit unfair to Terry. But this isn't about Terry, this is about Chris Boucher. And I think that had Chris Boucher not made the jump to Blake 7 and had continued to be commissioned to write Doctor Who, he would probably be thought of up there with Robert Holmes. Because I think his stories and writing are very, very good. It's just the lack of numbers that holds him back.
True, although I guess you probably would have hit that sort of John Nathan Turner wall where he suddenly decided he really didn't want a lot of remnants of the past and whatever. He wanted all new ideas and all new writers, etc. So to be honest, in some ways Blake 7 probably came at the right time, because he potentially would have only had another couple of opportunities to write for Who.
No, that's absolutely true. I think it would have been wonderful to have a Boucher written script edited by Christopher Bidmead. I think that could have been really, really fun. And certainly working for that more sombre Tom, I think would have been a really good opportunity that was missed.
Yeah. I still shake my head when, in 1981, when Blake 7 finished, there was a vacancy in the Doctor Who script editing department that Boucher wasn't tapped on the shoulder.
Yeah, look, I just think that, his writing really, really was exceptional. His characters was exceptional. My favourite Blake 7 episode is Rumours of Death, which was a Chris Boucher episode, and one that he put a lot of work into, and some of the dialogue in that is just spectacular. And the concepts and the way that he just sells things with just minimal but effective lines is really, really effective. And, I talk about him as comparable to Robert Holmes, and I think that does stand up. And I think that Holmes thought that as well, because when Holmes passed away, the person that Mrs. Holmes rang and said, "Can you tell all his friends at the BBC?" was Chris Boucher. So clearly there was a very close mentor relationship between the two of them. They were genuinely close.
Also, his work on the BBC books, he did that book Corpse Marker. Have you guys read that?
He did. That's a very good
I actually
book.
really like that book.
Yep.
Yeah.
4 or 5?
I only read that one, I'll be honest with you.
He's done a couple, I don't know how many.
Yeah.
At least 4.
But I definitely read Corpse Marker. I thought it was a really good book. I never dipped into the Candor City range, unfortunately. You guys listen to that at all?
We've been right through Caldor City. I think with the BBC books, I think it was very much a case he sort of tapped into each of his Who stories. The first one I think was kind of a bit of a callback to The Face of Evil. Corpse Marker is obviously a callback to The Robots of Death.
Yeah.
There's sort of a one quite loosely linked to Fendale. I think Match of the Day is the last one. And I think that's probably got a slightly more Blake 7 sort of slant to it. His favourite Blake 7, just going back to the script, he wrote Rumours of Death. He also wrote Star 1, which I think is an amazing episode.
Yes.
Yeah.
He did also, of course, write the finale.
Yes.
Spoilers for Spacefall listeners. I believe, actually, his favourite script that he worked on was Death Watch.
And that doesn't surprise me, because Death Watch isn't a story you think of as a classic. But any time I put that on, I'm just amazed at how well written that is. It's a very fun and enjoyable script.
Yeah.
Our connections with classic Doctor Who are continuing to fade. I think Philip Hinchcliffe is sort of the big behind the camera person who's still around from that era, but the companions are dropping off. Touch wood, Tom is still with us, and hopefully will be for a while to come. But that era is, it's a while ago now.
Yeah. Valet, Chris Boucher. Now we move on from one writer who could write to one who couldn't write. So, Richard, we've had Dave's views on Power of the Doctor's Power of the Doctor Who show's hot take. Rob and myself and Rob Lloyd did one as well. More of a cold shower. And now we're going to ask you for a bit of a hot flush in less than 3 minutes. Your thoughts on Power of the Doctor starting now. Thanks very much, Richard. And now I know.
Started for 10 minutes. Sorry.
No. Look, I'll start by saying, overall, I didn't mind it. I thought there were some really good aspects to it. I thought the return of Ace and Tegan was well handled. I thought they got probably just the right amount of stuff to do. And it was really good to see that they got a moment with each of their doctors.
Yeah.
Probably just to have that sort of little coda or whatever you want to call it. I will say I actually liked Jodie Whittaker's regeneration, because I do remember watching both Matt Smith's and Peter Capaldi's, and, they're going on about Peter Capaldi, never eat pears and stuff, and it was just, for God's sake, just get on with it.
Die, you bugger, die!
Yeah, it was. Like that Death in Bognor thing out of the...
Yeah, exactly. Die, you bugger, die! Exactly.
But I actually liked the way they handled that. It was really, let's get on with it and see what happens.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I thought that was really good. I don't think the Daleks were really necessary, just thinking about the villains, that they really didn't add very much, I don't think.
Your thoughts on the Caesar Romero of Masters?
I've never really got a lot out of Sacha Dhawan's Master. I think he's far too OTT. It's all, this is the day you die type enunciation. It's just, I get he's there to be the pantomime villain, but it's too over the top. I did think he had dialed his performance down a fraction in this. I say a fraction. But, I don't know. I can't honestly say his interpretation of the Master's one that's ever really grabbed me. I hope that's probably, that's it for him. Yes, if we're resetting, maybe we can reset the Master too.
He's making Anthony Ainley look like Sir John Gielgud, isn't he? Really? His performances. But I know Dave likes him. More steel. But I know Dave has the opposite view.
I think he's probably, with the exception of the 4 minutes we got of Derek Jacobi, I think he's probably the best Master we've had in the new series. I really quite like his performance. I think that there actually is light and shade to it. I know that, yes, sometimes that manic stuff can overshadow the rest, but look, I think it's there. But it was the same with Ainley. Ainley's more pantomime-esque moments did overshadow some really good stuff, particularly in stuff like Legopolis and Survival. Maybe not the King's Demons. I was thinking. But look, I thought it was good. Look, the 2 points that I just want to make.
Yeah, has your view changed after your hot take?
Not really. And look, I think what we found was that for a New Who story, there was an amazing consensus around the majority of fandom on this one, which all seemed to be, look, we all love the stuff we were meant to love. It was great to see those old Doctors back. Everyone said McGann was awesome and deserves to get a spin-off. We all love those moments with the old companions. William Russell, particularly for us older fans, who really grew up.
Well, yeah, that was actually the one point I had, and that probably is my absolute highlight out of that episode. And look, I'm sorry, because the other, hour and 28 minutes or something is probably blown away by one scene at the end.
Yeah,
but
so
that was the absolute highlight for me, seeing him.
Look, likewise, and I think everybody said they really enjoyed those scenes. Everybody more or less said the plot was absolute nonsense and didn't sold up to any scrutiny whatsoever.
No.
But who cares? It was there for those moments. It ended with a strong regeneration. So there was a remarkable consensus in fandom. But the other point I wanted to make, which is interesting, is that fandom also seems to have just switched off the Whittaker-Chibnall era incredibly fast, and all the conversations were just, within days, were about what's happening next. What's Tennant going to be like? Is he really a doctor? What's Bad Wolf doing? Who's the companion going to be? What's Shitty Gatwa going to be? What's his costume going to be like? There's a lot of energy around the new era, and it feels like the Chibnall era was just like, right, done, put that in a drawer and move on in a way that I haven't seen for a very long time.
There was no day of mourning, really, was it? It was basically, it was a bit of morning glory. I think it was like, well, that was all done, and the next day it's all brand new again, and Bad Wolf are sending out tweets and doing all that, and sort of starting to pep up the machine again, as it were, and DWM is rebranded as well to tie in with the relaunch of the show, and so it's
I think that's a good way of putting it, that lack of mourning period was, I think, very obvious. Part of it is probably that a lot of people are quite ambivalent to the Whittaker era. I don't think it has as many haters as people think it does, but I think a lot of people just
it's there.
Enjoyed it. It was there. It had good and bad episodes, and people moved on. But I think the protracted nature of it, really sort of only 2.5 series over a very long time, in part because of COVID, in part because of the pacing that Chibnall wanted for the series, meant that Whittaker was there for a very long time for quite a small output. And I just think people had kind of moved on by the time we got to her regeneration. It's particularly with that year of just specials.
And I'm okay with the 8 episodes a year approach as long as it comes out every year. I'd rather have 8 when the show relaunched in 2005. Originally it was 8 episodes until BBC Worldwide then said actually make it 13 so we can sell it. But I'd rather have 8 episodes a year consistently every year as opposed to 6 and then 2 and things like that. So
does the Disney money, the influx of that sweet Disney money, mean that they might up the episode count?
No, I think it'd be more on effects.
Yes, I think that's right. I think the Disney money is going to be concentrated.
Yeah.
And so we'll get much more expensive, better-looking episodes rather than spreading it out and having the same sort of quality but more of it.
Yeah.
Where they might be spending the extra money could be the spin-offs. There are lots of rumours about that sort of content. Certainly, I think Russell T Davies would like that idea of where Star Wars wanted to be prior to COVID, which is that basically every week you have a new episode of something in Star Wars. Now, that hasn't quite panned out the way it was because of a lot of delays and because the series have been truncated. But that idea that you go through a series of Mandalorian, then you have a series of Boba Fett, then you have a series of Andor, and then you're back to the next series of Mandalorian. Davies, I think, wants to do that. Whether they have the money and the capacity to do it, we'll find out. But it's certainly on the cards.
And the new unit spin-off as well with Kate Stewart and Eve Miles, allegedly. That threw John Barrowman over the edge.
So John Barrowman, hey?
Well, poor John. One of the things, just thinking about Disney, there's been no definitive announcement whether this Disney deal includes the classic series, has there?
No.
No, okay.
Certainly rumours that they're going to buy it all and take it off BritBox and put it all up, which I'll be totally on board for, because I haven't got BritBox.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because my reservations, just to sort of shift the conversation slightly, my reservations probably around Disney were how they would approach something like the classic series, because let's be honest, there are elements in there. Yes, okay, it's great, you're getting Doctor Who in front of more eyeballs, and there's obviously more money, and there's more opportunities to market and promote it and that sort of stuff. but you're potentially also putting it in front of more people who may have a problem with some of the content. You know, the obvious one being something, say, like Talons of Weng Chiang.
Or Creature from the Pit.
Yes, that don't maybe meet the Disney content standards.
They'll just put a disclaimer like they did on BritBox for Talons.
Will they? Or will they maybe just quietly drop it from the...
No, they'll do some CGI thing. They'll probably get Gary Russell to do some animation or something on...
I was going to say, they haven't got Breakfast at Tiffany's on Disney at the moment.
Not yet, no.
Or do we suddenly, I was about to say, or do we now get... Is there now a Disney content director or something who now sits in at the script read-throughs?
Oh, look, they have a say in what's going on. Absolutely. If they're pouring the cash in.
It would be a logical extension that they want, you know, some sort of say into what's appearing on their screen.
Well, hang on. There's a genuine real-world precedent for all this, and that is the Muppet Show. Now, Disney dropped all of the Muppet Show, and they did all of the episodes. Now, some of them did come with disclaimers. The Spike Milligan one particularly.
Yes, I could believe that.
That came with a warning at the front that just said, you know, this is of its time, and some of the views are not views of today, and please, you know, if you don't like that, don't continue watching. But they dropped all of those episodes, and look, I did watch the Spike Milligan episode, and I did cringe, particularly the It's a Small World After All stuff at the very end. That is not politically correct, let's just say.
No.
And you know, look, I'm pretty tolerant of the fact that people had different views a long time ago, but even I cringed watching that one back. But Disney did play it. It just had a warning at the front. So I think that's probably a very good precedent of where they'll go.
No, fair enough. Because I was thinking that if you take it to a logical extreme, will we see Doctor Who's equivalent of Gina Carano?
That's John Barrowman, isn't it?
Well, how does Barrowman play out in that?
It won't. If you're bringing back a show like Doctor Who, the last thing you'd want is having Barrowman associated with it. And why we did risk a relaunch when you're having the Daily Mail bringing back more stuff that he did, you know, many years ago, and everybody knew about it anyway.
Yeah, but they're still releasing the Ezra Miller version of The Flash, so...
Yes,
you know.
Yes.
And what Ezra Miller is alleged to have done is significantly worse than what Barrowman is alleged to have done. That's not to excuse Barrowman, but sorry, there are degrees and degrees, and Ezra Miller allegedly is considerably worse.
Absolutely, yes.
Whereas, you know, good, kind soul Henry Cavill has been dropped. So
yes, indeed.
I actually think that it's very hard to predict what Disney will do, and they're not the slaves to popular wokeness that people think. They're slaves to the dollar, they're slaves to the shareholder. And
well, I think they have recently come out and said it's all about the profit now, I think, isn't it?
Well, that's what they got their old CEO back, didn't they?
So if they think that they can still make $500,000 with Ezra Miller, they will put him out. If they think that they're going to take a wash on it, then they may not put it out and just take the tax loss.
And speaking of $500,000 for fees, we're now going to talk about our favourite and not so favourite convention anecdotes.
So welcome to the main topic for this Christmas special edition of 42 to Doomsday, where we were chatting about what would be fun to discuss, and we thought, over the years we've met a lot of people from Doctor Who at conventions. Some have been fantastic moments that are worth sharing, some have been less fantastic moments, which might make for entertaining moments. And look, there have been a couple of good moments there, so we just thought we'd throw out there a few of our fondest and most entertaining memories from cons and from meeting the stars of the show we love.
Let's go with Richard.
My goodness. Well, the first Doctor Who person I met, I think, would have been when Mark Strickson came to the Doctor Who club here in Victoria.
Is that in 88?
That was in 88 when he just moved out here. He was doing the rounds. Doing the rounds of the fan club.
Yeah.
Because I remember he had his wife at the time, Julie Brennan, with him, and I think Paradise Towers either was just about or had just been on TV here, I think.
It hadn't yet because we didn't know who she was. And I remember, because I was at that event at the age of about 7, and I do remember everybody sort of talking about, well, this is my character and this is what it does, and you'll see it very soon. And then I remember watching it on the ABC and sort of going,
her.
So that's her. Copies from the UK may well have been circulating. You probably had seen that.
Yeah.
But I know if you're waiting for the ABC, we hadn't seen it yet.
No.
Yeah, okay. So I remember that, and then I remember seeing the flyers for John Pertwee when he was here.
Oh, yeah.
Up in Brisbane
yeah.
In 90, and I'm actually kicking myself I didn't go to that now. Because that apparently was a great weekend.
Yeah.
I believe he was an amazing guest. I think probably the next one I saw would have been Mary Tam, I think, when she came out for one of the Who Ventures. That would have been about 93, I think.
And I believe gave one of the most disappointing opening statements of any guest you've seen.
Look, she was, I think, tired and jet-lagged and whatever, so look, I will cut her some slack. Yeah, I do remember the first question, I think one of the very first questions she was asked when she came out on stage was like, what was your favourite memory of being on Doctor Who? And, well, she actually said she didn't remember very much about it. And there was just sort of this collective sigh, I think, around the room. Having said that, I think once they showed her a few clips and that, she actually warmed up and really, once she really got into it, opened up a lot more as the weekend went on.
And so it's interesting, just as an aside, I think that a lot of the conventions I saw in that period and after, that was the format people started to default to as well, rather than relying on audience questions and things that the guests may not know, actually just going through and showing a series of clips and getting a reaction to it, sort of like the Tom Baker years, because that was far more likely to spark an anecdote or a memory than...
For sure.
Have you tried Vegemite?
Jesus.
I think they also had at that one, Mark Strickson came, I don't remember if it was both days or just one day, and Katie Manning did her usual appearance at the Sydney events as well.
Yeah.
And sort of, she did sort of take over the thing for the couple of hours she was there. Mm-hmm. Well, then there was, of course, Survival here in Melbourne, the convention that didn't provide a guest. I met Alexandra Tynan and Robert Jewell probably around that, because we did a thing for the 30th anniversary.
Okay.
And they came for that. I remember going up to Newcastle on the train to meet John Levine. It was initially going to be John Levine and Nick Courtney, but I think Nicholas Courtney withdrew due to health problems, or due to health concerns, I think shortly before the event.
You just don't want to get to play with John Levine.
That was my assumption.
Yeah.
And I think Katie Manning initially, I think, agreed to be there as well, but that was around the time she would have been in the States running around with Ruby Wax and Liza Minnelli. So, so it was just John Levine for the weekend.
Interesting.
Look, he was a very nice guy, and he had quite a few stories, and no slight to John Levine. That was probably the convention where more meeting other fans and socialising and that probably started to take centre stage, I think, and I probably spent far more time. And hello to Mark Corbin and all the guys up in Newcastle and Aaron Brockbank, if you're listening to this. I remember having an absolutely amazing evening in the bar after the convention had finished, where we watched Houseboat of Horror and got drunk, and it was great.
Well, that was memorable for all the different reasons.
Yes, all the different reasons. I remember going up, went to Whovention again to see Elizabeth Sladen. That would have been 96.
A 3.5 day weekend with
Yes,
Elizabeth Sladen.
it was. Yes, that was interesting. I remember the convention. I think there was some sort of big festival or something on in Sydney on the Sunday night, because I remember the convention just stopped, basically. Half the committee and everybody just took off. And the convention just sort of stopped.
Just all the Victorians staying in the hotel.
Yes. Well, and this is probably around the time, actually, I should say, with convention anecdotes, the Victorians probably got a bit of a rep, I think, for sort of the party, the party boys of the scene. If anyone has good memories, there was an ad for Bundaberg Rum here in Australia that featured the polar bear mascots.
Yes, the polar bear, yes.
Turning up to social events with bottles of Bundaberg Rum and, kicking the party up a notch. Tagline was, "Those bears know how to have a good time." Well, I do remember at a couple of the events we went to a bit later, it was very much sort of, "Those Victorians know how to have a good time," because it was pretty much wherever room we were in, that was where the room party was for a little while there. But we did get a bit of a rep. I think actually we even got one of the DWCA or Dallas Jones's Rabbits Awards for being the quiet achievers of Australian fandom. And probably the other anecdote I do have about that, I remember going up to, I think the Whovention 2001, it was the one with Colin Baker and Annika Wills. And the organisers of the convention, we had a suite, because there's 5 or 6 of us in our group, and we took a suite. And I do remember the organisers of the event doing the, "Oh no," when they realised that the hotel had put Annika Wills in the suite next door to us.
Right.
But yeah, look, I've got more, but I'll let someone else talk for a minute or two.
Dave?
Oh, look, there's a couple that I wanted to highlight. Like Richard mentioned, the first person I ever met was Mark Strickson, and I was 7 going on 8 at the time he came out, and I just didn't quite know what was going on. Like, I think I still wasn't quite understanding the difference between a character and an actor. Like, I knew that characters weren't real, but I didn't quite know how to react to, here's an actor that plays a character. So it was kind of just like going, that's Turlo, but not. He's in jeans. What's going on? So
and had Flintstones on them.
He did have Flintstones on them.
Yeah,
We all remember that.
Very good.
So yeah, didn't quite know sort of how to take that. And then when I went to the Enlightenment Convention at the age of 10, that you helped to run, Mark, all the guests there were behind the scenes people. So Dudley Simpson, Sandra Reed, and Robert Jewell. So Robert Jewell was in front of the camera, but behind a Dalek casing. So,
or in a Zabi suit.
And they were really interesting conventions because they each got a couple of hours to really talk about their work and go back behind the scenes into detail. Again, Robert Jewell sort of had points he wanted to make about being a Dalek operator, and we were actors, we weren't just people in a casing, we were hired to do a proper job, and sort of almost a bit of a chip on his shoulder about how people sort of thought about Dalek operators. He admitted he had sort of no memory of playing a macro whatsoever, which who can blame him? But again, like just bumping into Sandra Reed, sort of wandering around the convention, just my dad and I chatting to her, and just like, oh, you can just talk to these guests. They're people.
Yes,
was something that was really interesting, and most of my con memories come from that personal interaction that we've had with guests, and I think that's sort of what I wanted to highlight. And when we had Sophie Aldred out here, Richard, for the Timestorm convention in '97, look, we were so busy running that convention, we barely had time to pick our noses, let alone take part in it. And anybody who's run a convention knows what that's like. But those sort of evenings where we'll be just sitting around, because we all stayed at the hotel running the con, and that one evening where we were just all sitting in the stairwell of the hotel drinking scotch out of paper cups, and Sophie came down and said, "Oh, I'm not really sleeping, so I wander around. Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "Oh, we're just drinking a bit of scotch." She's like, "Well, pass some over."
Sign me up,
And so there was Sophie drinking scotch out of a paper cup with us, and just again not telling sort of outrageous anecdotes or really blue anecdotes, but just sort of the more risque ones, or the ones that might look bad if taken out of context, about the professionalism of Sylvester McCoy or something. And again, it wasn't like, oh my god, you won't believe this about McCoy, but it's just this is something you can't say on a DVD doco, or you can't say in front of a stage. You can tell those more human, and Sophie was really happy to tell those sort of stories, and just a really nice person.
She was great. Yeah, I'm actually quite proud of Timestorm that we managed to get that one off the ground and see it through to completion. She was an amazing guest. She worked really hard over the weekend because she pretty much was the linchpin of the event. And
didn't charge for autographs, and made sure everybody got their share of autographs.
Really available for fans. She hung around ages after the autographing sessions and things. I remember on the Sunday night, it was sort of a case, we sort of had to pretty much pick her up and take her away so people would get the hint to leave. Because she was still just quite happy talking to fans and taking photos for while we were sort of running around packing up. She was sort of in the corner, and there was the queue of people still wanting to take her and say goodbye. And
of course, her husband Vince came with her, her new husband at that stage, and Vince was sort of a lifestyle/sport presenter type person. And at the end of the con, we gave them a number of guests, sort of a photo book of Australia, a copy of a Midnight Oil album, because we probably wouldn't have been able to put that con together without the background music of Midnight Oil.
No, true.
And we gave her an Aussie Rules football. And because they're both very active, particularly Vince, they said, "Oh, well, look, show us how to kick it." So suddenly there's half a dozen of us and Sophie and her husband out the back of the hotel teaching them how to kick an Aussie football.
Yeah, playing a scratch footy match.
So that was fun. The other one that's very similar that I wanted to highlight, and again, Richard, you were there. Mark, you famously weren't, and we may even tell that story in a moment. And that is Fraser Hines.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the first professionally run con that we turned up to. It was when a company based in New Zealand came out and ran a big, what we now think of as a Comic-Con style con.
I think that actually was the first probably big pro con here in Melbourne.
It absolutely was, I'm fairly sure. And
what year was that?
1999, because it was the same weekend the Phantom Menace came out.
Yes, it was.
That's right. Yes, that's why I couldn't make it, yeah.
So it was this big con with sort of 30 guests and all the rest of it, but it was very professionally run, and the guests were escorted to the stage, then escorted off the stage, and then you had to pay for the autographs. It was the first time we'd really encountered that level of professionalism. But Richard,
or commercialism.
Yeah. And Richard, you'd organised to do an interview for our fanzine with Fraser Hines.
Yes, well, we got to meet him because he sort of come out. He was almost because there was a lot of guests from other shows and stuff, and then there was just sort of and Fraser Hines from Doctor Who's here, because they actually parked him for the weekend on the UK TV, the cable channel stand. And he was just sitting there at different times, and you'd come up and he'd sign autographs and have a talk and whatever. And he did a couple of presentations on stage. I remember we had the Curse of Fatal Death. We took their little video off. They let us put the Curse of Fatal Death on, and we had like a queue of people just standing there watching. Well, see, it hadn't been on anywhere
Oh, it
here.
hadn't been on. Okay. Yeah.
So a lot of fans hadn't seen it. So remember, we had that just running on a loop on their little stand for a while. But
Okay.
he was great. I got to spend a fair bit of time with him over the weekend. But yeah, we agreed that he'd do an interview for us for Sonic. So we arranged to meet him in a pub down at the Charles Dickens Tavern.
Oh, yes.
And this was the real contrast, with this really commercially run event. And the moment we said to Fraser, look, where do you want to do this interview? And he just said, well, can we go to the pub? And just completely want to get out of that environment.
Yeah.
We didn't quite know what to sort of make because we were all at the pub and Richard sort of said, look, Fraser's on his way. And then Fraser came and it's like, okay, there's a star of classic Doctor Who just at the table at the pub with us. And I can remember, because you guys all drank jugs of beer and I'm not a beer drinker, and apparently neither is Fraser, because...
No, you had the wine, that's
right.
I
went up to get a glass of wine and I sort of went to the bar and suddenly Fraser Hines was with me. And he said, oh, are you drinking red or white? I said, look, I don't mind. He said, look, I like white. If you buy the first bottle, I'll buy the second. We'll work out the third. And I thought, okay, that's the sort of night it's going to be.
Yep.
And we got quite drunk with Fraser Hines.
We did, actually, and it was really, really good, because I think Fraser's probably somebody, he has a fairly standardised, at risk of sounding a bit condescending, convention patter. He'll tell a lot of the same stories.
Well, I think rather than getting there and having nothing to say or not knowing how to react to questions, he's got a prepared routine.
He has. Unless you ask him a specific question, I think it tends to be much the same. But when we got down and we got in the pub and he sort of loosened up a bit, again, it wasn't really, scandalous stuff, but it was more just that human element of working with Patrick Troughton, working with the other members of the cast and crew and being on location, etc. And, just life working on Doctor Who in the 60s.
And just stuff, again, working with Patrick Troughton and talking about how they would try and buy the same car because they liked each other's cars or they'd get stuff done. But also those sort of more human stories. And we now know a lot more about this stuff. But he would talk about on payday getting a lift home with Patrick Troughton and training sort of having to stop at a couple of places to sort of hand out the alimony. Yes. And then sort of going, well, this is all I've got left for me. And I think we didn't really appreciate, this is 99, so it's over 20 years ago. We didn't really appreciate that side of Patrick Troughton, that human thing. And again, Fraser was saying it as one of Patrick's closest friends. So you got a really sympathetic but honest feeling what it was like to work with him.
And just to bring Mark into the story, later in the night, Mark and some of his friends had gone out to see the Phantom Menace, and at least one of them, I don't think really believed that Fraser was going to be joining us at the pub that evening.
Well, no, because before you and Fraser arrived, we rang a mutual friend of ours, Luke, hello if you're listening, and we said, hey, look, Fraser's coming to the Dickens, you've got to come to the Dickens, and thought we were just trying to get into the pub that he didn't want to go, and no, I'm going out with the other guys. We said, no, mate, Fraser's coming to the pub. Yeah, sure, guys, sure. And he just wouldn't believe us and went out with you guys to the Phantom Menace.
Yeah, so later in the evening, when Fraser was a bit looser, we got him to make a phone call. And it was sort of along the lines of, hello, Luke, my name's Fraser Hines. I play Jamie in Doctor Who. I'm here at the pub with some of your friends. They want me to tell you that you're a soft option. And literally 30 seconds later, the phone went, don't let him leave, we're coming in, we're going to be there in a few minutes, don't let him leave.
Yeah. And I think at that point was because you were with Luke.
I said, I'm there.
Sorry guys, he's been here for 4 hours, but he's going now.
Yes, I know, it was like, it was such a shame. Yes.
But look, it is those more human moments that I think we do reflect on. And then there are guests who are less inclined to do that sort of thing.
And look, I know we touched on this when we did our sort of anecdotes, what was it, our After Dark anecdotes, or whatever it was a little while ago. But I think that's probably the thing I found that's missing from a lot of the pro events. You don't really get those moments to interact with the guest. It's, you've got an hour on stage, at the end of your hour, get off. You've got your set 30 seconds, or not even probably when you get your autograph, hand over your cash, here's your signature, goodbye. And you don't get that sort of, just that few moments just to actually meet the person.
And someone who pushes against that still is Colin Baker. Now, we had met Colin before, Richard, at a Sydney event where I paid and you just talked your way into the exclusive Friday night cocktail party. And again, Colin made a point of working the room. He came up, he saw I was wearing a football club shirt and sort of said, looked at the founding day and said, that's really old. I said, look, a lot of football's really old in Australia. It actually predates the Federation. And then the Ashes were about to start up, and so we had a really good chat about the Ashes. And again, it's one of those things where you've got this guy who played an iconic character we all love, but just getting to talk to him about sport and about Australia and actually meet the guy
exactly
was a far more entertaining thing to do. And then later on at another very commercial convention where it was one of those ones where the guests were all sort of whipped off the minibus, put on stage, made to perform, then sort of whipped and taken to the airport for the next day. And Richard Whitman and I were sitting behind a club table, and Colin Baker just wandered along and just started chatting to us.
We were across from the green room. And it was a glass sort of conference roomy type thing, and he was obviously sitting in there just, waiting for the signal that he was allowed out, basically, to go on stage.
And so he made a prison break.
Yeah, so we sort of waved at him through the glass, and he obviously sitting there, and he sort of, and came out. And he was just standing at our table, just how you going, guys, and what's happening, and whatever. I talked to him for maybe a minute. And then all of a sudden it was sort of like, warning, 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 unauthorised guest contact. Yeah. And there was suddenly like minders just appeared and sort of, cattle prodded him back into the...
Well, but it was, but I remember that minder coming up, excuse me, Mr. Baker, but you need to be ready to leave. You should be packing your bags about now. And Colin's like, I've done this before. My bag's packed and ready to go. I'm chatting to these guys. Just relax.
Yeah. I suppose then you get the other extreme, like Paul McGann, who just really just sort of wandered down when he felt like it, wandered away.
With a cup of coffee, just going...
Paul McGann was an incredibly chilled dude.
He was.
And look, my favourite moment with Paul McGann, other than meeting him, which was really, really cool, and we had a quick chat about Hornblower, and he, threw Ian Griffin under the bus, which was quite entertaining. But this was back in the David Tennant era, so Christopher Eccleston sort of had just walked out on Doctor Who, and it was really kind of speculative about just how raw that was and how bad that was. And somebody asked Paul McGann the question, like, you're a long-time friend of Christopher Eccleston's, do you think he'll ever come back to the show? And McGann originally sort of tried to defer that a bit. Yeah, look, Chris and I both grew up, I was in Liverpool, he was in Manchester, and so we read a lot of the same companies and a lot of the same plays, and he's a really good guy and a really good bloke, really, really of that area, and I really love that about him. And as he kept going on, the presenter said, yes, but do you think he'll ever be in Doctor Who? Oh no, that's not going to happen. So they were really, really good. But look, that brings us to another comparison.
Down the other end of the pool. Yeah.
Look, I know that on this show previously, your mate Rob Lloyd, Mark, has spoken about meeting Peter Davison and not being all that impressed.
Oh, yes.
And he's another example of somebody who, look, on stage, he's very professional. He's got his pre-scripted answers. He's got his anecdotes that he likes to tell. He and Janet Fielding have clearly got a banter worked out between them, and they know that if they make a couple of jokes together at Matthew Waterhouse's expense, everyone's going to go, yeah, well done,
get a laugh, yeah.
It'll get a laugh. He knows how to do that sort of thing, but I got a really strong impression he didn't want to chat to the fans at all.
No.
And when it came time to get the autograph, I don't know if you've seen that scene in Galaxy Quest where Tim Allen's a bit pissed off with the fans and he's just sort of signing the photos and flicking the back of them. Peter Davison was very much like that. And there was another guest there who wasn't in the classic series. He would have been in the new series at that stage.
Yes, he would.
We won't name them because this anecdote isn't a very favourable one. But the first interaction we had, we were a few people back in the autograph queue, and somebody got to this person's autograph and started talking at them. And look,
it was quoting big sections of dialogue.
Yeah, he was saying, I really love your lines, and then would start to do the lines at this actor. And look, it wasn't the most socially aware fan. I can accept that.
Yeah.
But this actor's response to that was, is there security anywhere here? And just trying to get this fan just escorted away from him.
Get away from him, yeah.
And then Richard, as you say, we were opposite the green room for most of the weekend on the club table. Now, there was a lunch that was a sort of $500 a head gets you front row tickets, first to the autograph queue or photo, and an exclusive buffet lunch with all the guests. And this particular actor we saw come down in the lift, poke their head out of the lift, make sure there were no fans around, sneak over to the green room, get a plate full of sandwiches, sneak back out up to the lift and made sure they didn't speak to anybody.
Yes.
And the contrast between them and somebody like Colin, who is very much of the view, I'm here for the fans, was very, very obvious.
So it sounds like that person there was trying to get out of there in the nick of time.
That's one way of putting it.
Yes, that's one way of putting it, mate.
I would have sent them to the brig personally, but...
Hey!
Another sort of difficult moment at a convention that we saw, and it was a bit unfortunate, but it was just a very cack-handed moment from the point of the presenter, was when we went to see Katie Manning in Sydney.
Oh.
And it was very, very painful because she got up there and she spoke and everything. And then they said, right, we're going to auction off a copy of the Pertwee Years. At which point the MC turned to Katie and said, now, of course, John Pertwee only died recently. Do you have anything you want to say about that? At which point Katie actually started crying and saying, it's still very raw for me, I have been really busy, I haven't had a chance to process this. And just a whole room sort of thought, why did you have to go there?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, that was
Not very tactful.
the sort of
indeed.
sharp intake of breath, I think.
Not very tactful at all.
Listen to us, obviously, waffle on for a bit. Mark, what about you?
No. I was interested because obviously I was at the Mark Strickson Day as well in 1988. That was my first experience with a Doctor Who actor, as it were, and his wife Julie was there. I actually gave her a copy of Paradise Tales, a novel to sign. And I've actually still got it. It says "To Mark Ice Hot" from Julie Brennan. But they had a dog at the time, and apparently it was Gerald Flood, the guy who played Chameleon's dog. He couldn't look after the dog anymore, so they brought that dog out to Australia when they migrated over. So quite
Pretty
interesting.
impressive, considering he would have had to sit in quarantine for all that period of time. But
Yeah. Oh, and Dave's got that book as well.
I didn't have Paradise Towers, but I've just put off the shelf.
Mordred Undead.
Mordred Undead, signed by Mark and Julie Brennan. Yeah, I saw it. There you go.
Yeah, but that's non-canon because she wasn't in it, mate.
Well, maybe Mordred Undead would have been more exciting if she was.
See, I got Mark Strickson to sign Turlo in the Earthlink Dilemma.
Well, at least they had the words Turlo in there, so it's fine. But the next time I saw Mark Strickson was in the early 90s, and I was walking out of work, and I saw this guy sort of walking towards me and said, hold on. I stopped and said, Mark Strickson. He goes, yes. I'm sorry to tell you, I'm a Doctor Who fan. He goes, oh, hello, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. And we started talking. He goes, I suppose you don't know a guy called Richard Nolan, do you?
Yeah, that was, I'll fill in the blanks on that. It was actually 94.
Was it really?
As late as that, because we had him, he came out here in 88, he obviously went to uni and everything here, and in the, around 94, 95, he'd finished his degree and he decided to move back home. And he, again, did the rounds of the fan group sort of on a farewell tour.
And to drum up the fees to move back home.
Yes. Yeah, he came to the Doctor Who Club of Victoria's. He came to our Christmas party that year.
Right.
Which was probably an interesting afternoon in itself, because he sort of rolled up and first thing he said was, oh, where can I get a drink? Not twigging. We sort of said, oh, well, look, there's, cold cans or whatever over there. And he's like, no, I meant like a beer. We're sort of like, oh. And we're at one of the university colleges. So I remember we sort of did this walk down to the pub down on Royal Parade somewhere, like a good 10, 15-minute walk. And we sat in the pub and drank with him for about an hour. Because we'll have one more before we go back. We'll have one more before we go back. And apparently the Christmas party had just stopped.
The rest of the entire committee had gone to the pub.
Yes, had gone to the pub. Most of the... And anyway, and then he came back, and look, he was great. When he was on stage, he was really engaging. Look, he's great with the fans and all that sort of thing. But, yeah, we paid him by cheque, and he had lost the cheque. And, yes, when he found you, it was like, well, did he know me? Because he needed a replacement
and
cheque.
I crossed the road from your work, and I
Yes.
said, actually, yes, he's actually working in that building. So I walked with Mark Strickson across the road to a phone box outside
And
your
you
building,
rang me, yes.
and I said, oh, hello, Richard, it's Mark here. Oh, there you go. I've got Mark Strickson here.
There's someone here who wants to talk
Well,
to you.
yeah, exactly. I said, if somebody wants to talk to you, it was Mark Strickson. Anyway, you sorted out the money and that sort of stuff. And I said to Mark, do you want to come in the pub? He goes, oh, I'll take out for a drink. He goes, oh, I can't. I'm actually going to meet the English cricket team for a drink. And I said, oh, okay, fine. Well, I'm not going to hang around with those guys then. So that was my close encounter with Mark Strickson until I went to Sydney to some con with him and Janet in the about 2010, I think it was.
Right.
Louise Pageau, I remember seeing at a Doctor Who club
Yes,
event.
that was
Now,
actually the Christmas party before.
yes, now Louise was in Seeds of Death.
Yes.
But my mum knew her more from Carson's Law, a
was.
big legal drama in the early 80s
Yes, she
over
was.
here with Lorraine Bailey, ex of the Sullivans. And she was lovely, actually. She was a really nice lady. Lots of anecdotes about the story and obviously
was.
about her time moving over to Australia and that sort of stuff, which is, when you're engaging with Doctor Who actors, it's actually always better to talk to them about the non-Doctor Who stuff.
For sure.
So it's a bit...
For sure. Well, we interviewed her for Sonic, I think, about 6 months earlier.
Yeah, okay.
She'd been out here for quite a while. She was born
Yes.
in New Zealand and went to England, then settled out here. But she said she sort of went through a thing about every sort of 5 to 8 years. The next wave of fandom would suddenly discover that she lived in Australia, and she'd go through. She'd deal with the next, sort of next generation of fans, basically. And we were about the fourth, I think, who'd sort of, oh, look, Louise Pageau lives here in Australia.
And
She's in the white pages.
Yes.
And your episodes all exist.
Yes. Yeah, I remember that. So, yeah, we did get her down. I think she was down in Melbourne for something, so she agreed to come
Yeah.
for the
She was
day.
lovely.
Yeah, she was. She was
Yeah.
really nice.
And I remember the Enlightenment 91 convention, Dave, you mentioned I was on the organising committee. Yes, we had Dudley Simpson and Sandra Reid and Robert Jewell. Main memories of that convention were organising was I was the secretary at the time, so I was taking all the bookings, and getting, obviously making sure they're registered. And I had my trusty Commodore 64 computer. I had a little database there. And I put all the attendees' names in there, and of course I take the computer down there and load up the disc, and the bloody disc is corrupted.
Oh no!
So so it was a little bit stressful, but we had
old school paper.
Old school paper was the way to go in the end. But the main thing I remember about that convention was, even though I was on the organising committee, we never got to spend any time with the guests
at all.
No, the upper echelons of Victorian fandom took the guests over to a restaurant in St Kilda where they sort of fed them with a pasta meal, while the rest of us were sort of stuck behind, keeping things running.
We talked about Survival. Look, I'm not going to drag that up again, but Survival did actually have a guest. One of the attendees there was in Sandra Reid or Alexandra Tynan. She was in her class at art college.
Oh.
And sort of said, look, I can probably, do you want me to ring her? I'll see if she'll come, happy to come down for the afternoon. And she did. And look, she was great. Short notice and everything. She was more than happy to talk about it. Again, I think it's probably a bit of a sigh when, what was it like creating the Cybermen?
When you send tinfoil to your shriek.
But again, I remember she came to quite a few things. She put up with a lot probably from the DWCB over the years. I think great. Every time there was an event of some sort.
And one moment that I remember hearing about at Enlightenment from another member of the committee, Damien, who, again, Damo, if you're listening, hello. But he was basically buying the autograph queues for most of the weekend. And he said it was just so amusing watching this because fandom was very amateur at the time and really didn't quite know how this all sort of worked. And so he'd be sitting there with Dudley Simpson next to him and someone would come up, oh, hi, could you please sign my Target novel? Yeah, of course I can. Frontios. That's about 5 years after I finished on the show. Oh yeah, it's the only Target I've got with me. Oh no, that's fine. I'll sign it. But he just makes sort of you think of just how unprepared and unpolished we all were.
I'm going to actually add to that because I got Dudley Simpson to sign my Doctor Who The Music Volume 1 on vinyl. Sort of took it and his face went a bit crestfallen. I couldn't work out why. Then I realised it actually had none of his music on it. No. So yes, that was my Frontios on vinyl. But speaking of that convention, there was a DWB publication. It was called the Compendium, I think it was. There's a picture of Sandra, Dudley, and Robert on the steps of the outside the hotel where we have the convention. And there was a barbecue. We were cooking a barbecue in the background. And in this picture, there's a picture of my upper torso. Back to the camera with a bit of my ass there. So I'm legit. So I'm going to find that picture and. Anybody wants an autograph, I'm more than happy to do it. But obviously Sandra Reid, she was excellent. And Dave showed me a picture of his 10th Planet book, and it was signed in 1991. To Dave, best wishes from the Cyber Mum, Sandra Reid. Yeah, she was lovely. And after that, look, I then got sucked into the big con things, literally, in terms of the Lords of Time VIP package with Davison and Colin Baker and Paul McGann, and paid the money for the dinner with Davison, as it were. And you're right, the anecdotes trot out. And he mentioned the Matthew Waterhouse one. I said, actually, on the commentary for Kinder, Matthew quite strongly challenges him coaching Richard Todd and all sort of stuff. He goes, oh, I hadn't heard that, and everything like that. But the main thing out of that convention was guests are on the stage, and the host, and I use the word loosely, was asking some very bad questions. And all of a sudden, you hear a bit of fracas in the background. And then all of a sudden, you see these like security guards, and it looked like Oak and Quill out of Fury from the Deep, sort of shuffling towards the front. And all I heard was the host on stage go, 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 go! Because a fight...
I thought he was Burnside.
Yeah, exactly. Go, go, go! Because a fight had broken out in the toilets between two Doctor Who fans at the event.
Wow.
So,
yes, okay.
there was a big fight going on. So, obviously, 30 years of grudges had exploded over in the men's room, and the fight continued out into the foyer.
Oh, my goodness.
And you hear a couple of ladies shrieking, stop, stop, stop. Anyway, so look,
You're
the
a
fight...
Doctor Who convention. Why somebody think of the children?
Exactly. So the fight did get subdued, but apparently there was a police report on both of those individuals made. So,
I mean, Dave and I were in an event, one of the events in Sydney, the one with Sylvester McCoy and Nicola Bryant.
Yes.
And there was a altercation between two fans there that resulted in a chair being thrown.
Yes, the problem was the chair was thrown at another fan, but missed him and flew very close to Sylvester McCoy. At which point Sylvester McCoy very quickly exited the room.
Yes, which was sort of, okay, I think the night's over.
Yes.
And yes, like later in the weekend, one of the two fans, my memory is, was asked to leave.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right, Mark. Obviously, there are lots of personalities in fandom, and some get on very well. Look, I mean, we've been mates for 30 years.
Yeah.
Others don't.
Yeah.
And when you're stuck in a convention for a full weekend, sometimes
Correct.
Friday night to Sunday afternoon, usually not getting much sleep, usually a bit of alcohol involved.
Yeah.
And there's also, I think at some of these pro events, not a lot to do when the guests aren't on stage
Correct.
or you're not queuing for autographs.
Correct.
Yes, sometimes these blow up as you'd expect them to.
Exactly. It's like a tinderbox of fandom. I was at a VIP lunch with Paul McGann. Great guy.
Great guy.
Really, as you said, really chilled. Had a really good conversation with him about the Beatles and Massive Attack, the bands. One thing I noticed was in this convention he was paired up with a Z-list actor from Enterprise. I can't remember his name.
The
Dominic Keating,
yes.
English guy, yeah.
In this VIP event, there was obviously a throng of people around Paul, and poor old Dominic was sort of left with the, how can I say, table 9 people from fandom there. And after 20 minutes, he did a Briggsy and just basically said, George Costanza, that's it, I'm gone! Just walked out the room, never to be seen again. A bit like his career, really.
And yeah, look, we probably should make that point because what we've discovered over the years, both from our experience and watching the experience of others, again, you treat human beings as human beings. Nicola Bryant sits down at your table and you actually just talk to her about what's she doing, what's her husband up to.
I don't think we even talked to Doctor Who about Doctor Who at all.
We mentioned we were really into the bill at that stage. She started talking about actors that she knew in the bill. Yeah. She found out I was doing a politics degree and her husband was there, said, I'm a lecturer in politics in the US, let's have what's going on with all this One Nation stuff.
Yep, that's right.
And we just had really good conversations, but you do get fans that just don't know the boundaries.
Yeah.
And just talk at these people in a really uncomfortable way.
Yeah.
Like the fan who, I think, remember at one of the Lords of Times who criticised Colin Baker's singing voice?
Yes, I've got that written down, actually, yes.
And said,
yes.
you should have done that in a different key.
It was pretty uncomfortable, actually, yeah, poor Colin. There was a VIP thing again. Luckily I got to go to it. It was John Leeson and his wife on the table to begin with, and Colin Baker was another table with more table 9 types. And I was having a lovely conversation with John Leeson's missus about North Wales and holiday destinations there. And all of a sudden you hear Colin Baker scream out, "Rotate!" And basically, he comes onto our table and the first thing that somebody says was, my mate Rob Lloyd goes to him, "So, this Eric Saber guy, what's going on with you and him?"
Goodness.
And that just set him off for like 40 minutes. You could not get a word in about anything. But it was actually a very nice guy, Colin. And I went to a dinner later on. Armageddon had some sort of dinner, had McCoy, McGann and Aldred there. And I originally wasn't going to go. A mate of mine rang me up, goes, "Look, it's this much. Do you want to go?" And I said, no. 5 minutes later, I said, "Actually, I think I will go." And I got sat next to Paul McGann.
Again.
And he vaguely remembered me from the last time. So, we're talking about him building a house in Nepal and music and that sort of stuff. And again, the table 9 types at the top of the table were getting very upset about that McGann was down here. But they swapped around. But then again, we spoke to McCoy and Aldred about Steiner schools and soccer and that sort of stuff. So again, it comes to, as you said, Dave, don't talk to them about Doctor Who. They've heard it all before. Talk to them about other stuff, other work.
Find out what sort of people they are.
Exactly,
Get to know them, yeah.
We're very lucky, I suppose, now where, 30 years ago, Doctor Who guests over in our shores are very, very few and far between. And I think the last 10 years has been definitely have an influx over here of guests. 2
events. Our friends over at the Sirens of Audio are organising an event, I believe, with Sophie Aldred and Janet Fielding.
Right.
Which I'm looking forward to. And yes, the professional con people have announced they're doing a Lords of Time 5 in February with at least one Doctor Who guest. More to be seen. Philip Hinchcliffe. Of the ones I really want to see, the one I've got a chance is Caroline Ford. I would love to see Hinchcliffe.
Yeah, I would just hear what Hinchcliffe had to say.
Cartmel.
Yeah, we've had a bit of a retrospective in terms of our convention anecdotes. Went and asked some of our listeners their favourite convention anecdotes, and I got one from Doc Hume. Whenever we meet any big Doctor Who name, we milk it as much as we can in our podcast. These seem to be old hat to some, but when we bumped into Annika Wills in the corridor at Capital 3, she then invited us to join her for breakfast when we did a big interview with her, and she was lovely and disarmingly frank about the 1960s. We queued for the autographs of Matthew Waterhouse and Sarah Sutton at Capital 2. Mark, who was Mark, the co-host on the show, had his Howe Stammer Walker book, The Companions, open at the full-page publicity photo of the Peter Davison TARDIS crew sitting on the little bridge, thinking that if Sarah and Matthew each signed a corner each, then one day he can get Janet and Peter to sign the other 2 corners. It would make a lovely memento. Unfortunately, Mark presented the book to Matthew, who proceeded to scrawl an enormous autograph right across the middle of it. When we reached Sarah further along down down the table and explained to her Mark's thwarted plans. She lifted up the book and called down the table, "Matthew! I think Janet will be having words with you when she sees this." Also, our Mark met Terence Dix and rather boldly told him, "I think you really ought to be knighted for your services to literacy." And Terence thought for a second before replying, "Yes, so do I."
We have another one here, which is Mark from the Diddly Dum podcast. I remember seeing one of my childhood favourite Who stars standing at the hotel bar at my first convention. I was so excited to see them that all I managed to blurt out was, "I don't know anyone else who likes you, but I think you're really great." Which felt like a compliment in my head, but sounded somewhat different in my ears. Their face plummeted from delight to confused hurt, like it had just fallen off the ninth floor balcony. Note he doesn't actually say who that was.
No. Cue Spider-Man sound effects. I've also got one here from Jack Bowman, 2021, who said, "Well, I did J&T's seconds to last convention appearance as an interviewer. And at his last appearance, he was a liver failure mess who couldn't speak." Oh, poor old J&T. And Dave, get you to read this one, please.
So this is from Jason McLaughlin, who says, "Here's a nice anecdote about the legend that was Bernard Cribbins. I was lucky enough to meet him twice in his lifetime, once in 2013 at Collectomania in Milton Keynes, and once at London Comic Con in 2017. Both occasions he was an absolute delight, but it's the second meeting that sticks in my mind. I was with a friend who wanted to meet Wilf, and let's just say she is quite ample in the chest area." This is starting to sound like a Carry On movie.
You're a matron.
Nice.
"It was first thing in the morning, and we were virtually first in the queue. Bernard was a delight as always, and as he handed my friend her autograph, she asked if she could have a selfie. This was well before Con started charging for photos at signing desks. Bernard, quick as a flash, took a microsecond glimpse at my friend's cleavage, and in true Carry On style said, 'You can have anything you like, darling,' with a cheeky wink. Well, that made our day. My friend couldn't shut up about how great it was Bernard had flirted with her."
Well done, Bernard. Yeah, so hopefully that was a bit of fun down memory lane. It's our version of therapy, really, in some cases, wasn't it, really? Hopefully you all found that a bit interesting. It was nice to reminisce for a little bit about the good old days and not so good old days.
Yeah, one day we'll tell the real stories behind some of these, but...
Yes. Yes.
After legal scrutiny.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, that'll probably be the posthumous podcast, I think.
If you are hearing this podcast, we are dead. Here's what really happened in fandom.
Exactly.
And as Rob tells us, the dead can't be sued.
Frequently tells us. And now it's time for, hold on, Target Book Club. Yes, it's Target Book Club time, and usually we have a theme around these novels. Last year was, I think, one-hit wonders, where people only got to novelise their story once, and most of the time it's probably a good reason for that.
Christmas in July was The Master?
Yes, it was Master, exactly right, not with Cesar Romero. And this one, we've actually themed the Dalek stories from the classic era, except for one.
Yes, we had a rule that no one could pick Remembrance, because we all know it's a fantastic top 5 book. We don't need to revisit that.
No, it's been discussed many, many times. So
Yes.
we thought we'd cast it out a bit further. And Dave, which one did you select?
I selected The Chase.
Richard?
I read a book called Doctor Who and an Exciting Adventure with the Daleks.
Excellent. Now I know Rob will be talking about Genesis of the Daleks when we will look up at the time scanner. And I read Planet of the Daleks. Now let's do them in broadcast order. So Richard, It is you up first.
As I said, I read a novel called Doctor Who and an Exciting Adventure with the Daleks. Now this is obviously the first Doctor Who book.
Now is that the original paperback?
That is the original paperback.
What year was that out?
This book was first published in 1964 in hardback by Frederick Muller Limited.
Oh, yes.
And as I said, it is the original Doctor Who novel. I have here in my hand a later edition, which is the Armada paperback for boys and girls, at the princely sum of 2 and 6, which was published in 1965. It is the first Doctor Who paperback.
Wow.
Yeah. This edition is unique in that it doesn't use the internal illustrations that were in the original hardback printing by an artist called Arnold Schwartzman, and they were used when Target reprinted the Muller editions later on.
Yeah.
This actually has a new front cover and new internal illustrations done by an artist called Peter Archer.
The cover's quite striking. It looks more
It
like
is.
Adam Adamant than Doctor Who,
does,
but it still
doesn't
looks
he?
pretty cool,
With
actually.
the glowing cape and whatever.
Yeah, it's
He's a
very
bit out of
nice.
Adamant,
More
isn't it?
pertwee, isn't he? Yeah, that's really cool.
So there
When
you
did
go.
you get that from?
One of the ones that I didn't get rid of when I sold off my collection, so
It's very good condition.
yeah,
Anyway, we digress.
we do digress. Probably the most immediate thing about this book is that the first couple of chapters, because at that point this is an exciting adventure with the Daleks, there was clearly no plans to novelise the slightly less exciting adventure with some cavemen.
Or the slightly even less exciting adventure with the TARDIS.
Yes,
Yeah.
we have to introduce the characters. So
Yes.
this actually presents an entirely new origin story. The first couple of chapters are a completely new origin story for how they all met. I guess probably in the real world thing, this perhaps is one of the earliest sort of Dalek Mania type releases.
Yeah.
To trade on the popularity of the Daleks. There is, if you look at the season 1 ratings, there is a big upswing once the Daleks come in the second story. So I guess there's probably also the fact that, there's several million viewers or potential readers who haven't actually seen An Unearthly Child, so maybe don't understand why these people are together. So so the first couple of chapters are all about how Ian and Barbara come to be with the Doctor. And it's set on a foggy night on Barnes Common in sort of South London, I think it is.
Yeah.
Which is quite isolated and desolate and, deserted, and it's heavy fog. And Ian Chesterton's driving home after a failed job interview at a rocket producing company.
Oh, right.
He is a school teacher, but he's more a scientist than a teacher. And that is probably one of the differences with Ian as presented in this novel. For a failed job interview, and he's had a really lousy day. He's ripped his jacket in the morning before he went out for the job interview, and he can't see in the fog, so he's going to have to walk home, and by the time he gets home, his dinner's going to be ruined and everything. So
First world problems, isn't it?
yeah, it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
But he comes across a car accident. Now, it's where the car has slewed into a lorry, and he meets the injured Barbara.
Oh, God,
And,
yeah. Okay.
Yes, and together they discover that the driver of the army lorry, unfortunately, has been killed in the accident.
Right.
But without sort of rehashing the whole thing, they then encounter the Doctor because Barbara was driving Susan home because of the fog, and they then encounter the Doctor and they stumble into the TARDIS. There is a lot of time around setting up the whole idea that the TARDIS can travel in space and time, and the fact that the Doctor has this wonderful machine, and that he's not just some loony. Ian thinks that there's a trapdoor or something in the basement, and they've dropped down into this elaborate. What does the Brigadier says? All done with mirrors or whatever. So there is quite a bit of time spent on that about explaining the concepts and that to obviously to Ian and thus to the reader about how this is done. We also see other things like the inside of the TARDIS, like the food machine that produces these little
The
sort of
Mars bars.
Yes.
Yeah, the Mars bars,
Little
yes.
Mars bars thing. And
Bacon and eggs.
yes, and then it has a little machine that crawls over his face and gives him a shave, and then adjusts the other thing and gives him a haircut.
Wow.
And whatever. So that's all the setup. Once they get to Skaro, look, we're obviously a lot closer to what we know from the televised serial. Probably the other thing with the narrative is it is, I think, the only novel that it's written in the first person from Ian's perspective. So there is quite a bit of stuff in the televised story that's not there. So like Barbara meeting the Dalek for the first time, and things like Susan's journey through the forest to get to the TARDIS and meet Aladon and whatever, they're all recounted third hand.
Okay.
As Ian hears, we obviously learn what's actually been happening.
Do you think that works?
It does, I think. The side effect is that there's not a lot of the Daleks doing Dalek things
Right.
during this book. And in some ways, that's probably a common theme of a lot of the novels. I mean, if you think of something like, the Dalek invasion of Earth, the story actually takes time to show the Daleks moving around London landmarks and
Yes.
being on, which really isn't covered in the novel.
No.
It's just, oh shit, there's Daleks, let's get out of the way. But we don't get a lot of those scenes of the Daleks, in their control room plotting and that sort of stuff. It does also mean we don't get the Dalek tripping on the anti-radiation drugs, so maybe that's a small mercy. But yeah, so we learn everything as Ian learns it. All the big moments are there. Obviously, they get captured, they escape. The escape actually takes 2 attempts in the novel.
Okay.
They have the first thing where they try to block the door and the Dalek sees through it and leaves, and then they get the second one onto the cloak. There's the ambush of the Thals, and then obviously we have the expedition, or the second tape of the old VHS set.
Yep.
It is in the first person, and because of that, look, Ian obviously is the focal point, and it's really a lot of his thoughts and his feelings as he's trying to make sense of this weird situation he's been thrust into. And I guess you can probably draw a parallel there, perhaps, to the early episodes of the televised series, where Ian really is the hero and the Doctor is this sort of more enigmatic character in the background. It is Ian here who actively rouses the Thals to fight. If you remember in the TV version, he's a lot more conflicted about, can we ask these people to fight and die for us? No, here it's just, we need to get out of here. We're all going to die. we need to attack the Daleks. Yeah, and he very much leads the expedition in the final attack on the city. There's really no sort of ambiguity there. He is a bit of a different character from the one we know on TV. He's more cynical and probably harder than sort of the kindly William Russell.
What about Roy Castle? Miles away from that portrayal.
Yeah, I think we are miles away from there. He is a scientist. He's not that nice school teacher character. He does immediately know that the Doctor sabotaged the ship.
Oh, okay.
When the Doctor takes the fluid link out. And it's very clear the Doctor knows he knows.
Right.
But because Susan and Barbara sort of buy into it straight away and really can't do anything. Yeah, it probably also makes far more clear there are some unresolved romantic tensions, shall we say, between Ian and Barbara that probably weren't there in a kid's show at 6 o'clock on a Saturday night. And at the end, it's very clear there is the beginnings of a much deeper romantic relationship forming between them. And the Doctor does actually say to them at the end, look, do you want to stay and help the Thales rebuild their world? Because I can't offer you anything except, danger and probably a chance to never go home. Do you want to stay? But they obviously have the scene where, no, they make the choice that, no, they want to stay. They want to stay with the Doctor. Just in closing, look, the Doctor himself is probably more in line, I think, with the harder and probably slightly shadier character we see maybe in the aborted pilot, perhaps, I think, than, sort of even what we see in An Unearthly Child. He's far more evasive and obstructive in the early parts of the story where they're trying to find where Susan's gone after the car accident and, they stumble into the TARDIS. And he outright, this isn't a case that, they sort of stumble around the TARDIS a bit and he hits the button and takes off. Ian and Barbara both pass out when they wind up in the TARDIS. And when they wake up, he tells them we left Earth ages ago and we're now in, he uses the words, in the next universe but one. But
okay, right. In the 49th century where it was...
Yeah, but he has actively made the decision while they're unconscious that, no, we're leaving.
We're going.
Yeah, you're gone, sorry, you're with me now. Yeah, so, look, the Thales are still a bit faceless. They're still largely there. Christus, he gets a much bigger role in this. He and Ian are very clearly friends, and there's that moment at the end where they realise Ian's going to leave and, they're never going to see each other again, that, things get a bit emotional there for a moment or two. Sort of that Vinnie Jones. It's been emotional.
It's been emotional.
Probably the only other thing, just as I wind up, I haven't mentioned the other main departure from the televised story, which is, of course, the glass Dalek, leader Dalek at the end of the story.
Yes.
There is a short passage in here. We actually get an idea of what David Whittaker maybe intended the Daleks to look like. The lead-in is, the second thing I saw was a glass Dalek. He was resting on a kind of dais, and his casing was totally made of glass. Inside, I could see the same sort of repulsive creature that the Doctor and I had taken out of the machine earlier and wrapped in the cloak. The Dalek looked totally evil, sitting on a tiny seat with two squat legs not quite reaching the floor. The head was large, and I shuddered at the inhuman bumps where the ears and nose would normally be, and the ghastly slit for a mouth. One shrivelled little arm moved about restlessly, and the dark green skin glistened with the same oily substance that had revolted me before. They do obviously smash the glass casing, and they see there's this nasty little scene of the Dalek sort of writhing around on the floor, basically, as it dies. Yeah, so look, I really enjoyed reading this because it's a novel. There's no budget, obviously, or, studio space constraints or anything, so they can tell a bigger story. The Dalek city, it's not sort of you come out of the forest and there's the city. There's this whole ash plain that stretches for miles. And the Dalek city is probably a good mile or two away from the edge of the forest. Journey through the cave is a lot bigger and it's filled with more obstacles. There's a tentacle monster that they fight when they're down at the water's edge, rather than being suggested. There is actually a whole thing and they're climbing up the cliff and this monster attacks them. Look, they can do more, obviously, with the final battle in the city. It's not a Dalek sort of careering into a panel, blows up, and that's the end of it. They do creep around in the Dalek city to get to the control room, and Ian specifically sends two of the Thales, Aladon and Ganatus. He specifically sends them down to smash the hydroelectric system.
Sure.
To cut the Dalek's power, and that's ultimately obviously what resolves the story. But yeah, look, overall, really enjoyed this one. Because it's written in the 60s, look, it's probably written at a slightly higher level, I think, than a lot of the later targets, which maybe is a reflection perhaps of the expected literacy standards, perhaps of kids at the time,
yeah,
I think. But look, I mean, we all know the story of the Daleks, so really, I mean, there's nothing groundbreaking in this. It's probably most interesting because of the variances, really. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. 4 glass Daleks out of 5.
Very good. When you're reading that passage about the glass Dalek, the first couple of lines around the glass Dalek on the dais, That reminded me of Revelation, because that's pretty much what it was. It was the glass Dalek on a dais.
Well, it was,
wasn't
and I think they made the point that was the first time it was probably feasible to actually build something like that. But
cool.
so no, that was actually a really good read. I hadn't read this one for quite a while, so really good. One actually quick interesting note before I hand over. This book and this edition specifically says the Daleks are about 3 feet high. So I don't know how Ian actually is meant to get into the casing, but it does actually specifically say 3 feet high, whereas in the later ones it's been changed to about 5.
Does sound like a Chumley.
It does.
Yeah.
So but there you go. That's go and check that out.
Very good.
What was it Molly used to say? Do yourself a
Do
favour.
yourself a favour, yes. Thank you very much.
No
now,
worries.
whizzing from the first Dalek serial to the third Dalek serial, we've got...
The Chase.
Dun, dun, dun.
So I have my copy of The Chase here, which I've read over the last few days. We discussed convention anecdotes earlier, and this is signed by Robert Jewell and by Dudley Simpson,
Fantastic, who actually both worked on the story.
who both worked on the story, yes.
Yes, very good.
Now, interestingly, this is book 140 in the Doctor Who target range.
Yes.
It was published in 1989, so it's very much at the back end of the range.
Yes.
And it's by John Peel. And this was, of course, at the point where a lot of the Dalek stories still hadn't been novelised, and it wasn't clear if they would be. And this became the first of 5 Doctor Who Dalek novels that John Peel ended up doing.
Yes.
He did this, the 2 books of Dalek Master Plan shortly afterwards, and then a few years later, Power and Evil.
Yes.
But it was very much a case, I think, of the time that Terry Nation would only let John Peel do those do those Dalek stories, and then we waited a long time for Resurrection and Revelation to complete the set.
Yeah.
So look, this was definitely very much anticipated when it came out. I can remember even being quite young in fandom that it was a big deal that John Peel had got the rights to go and do these books.
I do remember that being in DWM, hey, the Chase is coming, this is a good
it is a
thing.
big deal,
Yeah, so it was a big deal at the time. It's got a really nice Alistair Pearson cover. Now, the first thing you get to when you read the book is a little preface from John Peel, where he says, now that we're entering an age where it's possible that the stories are going to one day be repeated or released on video, which we think now, we've got the DVDs and the VHS and BritBox, obviously at this stage it still hadn't been seen on terrestrial TV for a long time, but Doctor Who was starting to be released and repeated.
Correct.
He says that he's going to write this based on Terry Nation's original scripts, not on the broadcast version. So I was expecting something a bit like your book, Richard, where there was a massive divergence from the TV show. There actually isn't. What happens is very similar in plot to what you see on screen, but with a few little differences in there. The Morton Dill stuff's done quite differently. All the stuff with the tour guide is out, but you do get the stuff of the Dalek deciding that the best way to punish humanity is just to let this guy live, which is quite amusing. Some of the dialogue is a little bit different, particularly when you get towards the end. A lot of the stuff in episode 6 has obviously been written a bit. Particularly the introduction of Stephen was done quite differently to how it was on screen. And also little things like where the Doctor decides to imitate the robot replica and go and try and convince the Daleks that it's killed all the rest. Definitely was obviously added into the scripts by the production team as a bit of a padding moment, because it's not in the book.
Yeah.
So you do get some little differences along that, but mostly it's fairly loyal to the on-screen version. It was definitely a very good read. John Peel is not a fantastic writer, but he's a very capable writer. It's interesting that his style does a lot of sort of narrative cutaways in that, and Ian thought this might be the case, and then he'll say, Ian was correct in this, and little did he know this was also happening, or unknown to the 3 time travellers, back on the Dalek ship, the Dalek leader was. So there's a lot of those sort of very interesting narrative outside bits.
So is that how you handle, again, the Daleks doing Dalek things moments?
There is a bit of that, and look, it certainly doesn't dive as deep into the Daleks as certainly the Master Plan books would, and then particularly, I think, Power of the Daleks really did, which obviously were longer again. Now, this is 144 pages, so it is definitely at the longer end of those earlier target books. But it does certainly have stuff like the Dalek leader reporting back to the Dalek Prime on Skaro, and the Dalek Prime sort of saying, if you don't get the Doctor this time, don't bother coming back. There's lots of little things, that we know now, like, for example, it's a big deal that the Daleks have found enough terranium to power this one Dalek ship, and if this is the only time ship they have, because it's all the terranium they have, so all those little things that obviously come from the future are put in there. But look, I think The Chase is a really good story. I think that it works even better in the book form because, look, as much as I love The Chase, it is not Richard Martin's best piece of directing.
No.
And Richard Martin isn't a great director to start with.
Correct.
And look, the production on The Chase does suffer from the fact that there's about 6 different locations and they just can't afford to make them all really, really well. Whereas that obviously isn't a factor in this book. So it stands together really well. It's a really good read. I do think it's the weakest of the John Peel novelisations because he's just getting the hang of it, and what comes later I think is going to be far superior.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really enjoyable. And again, if you were reading this in 1989, when we were really just sort of getting into that tail end sort of second golden era of the Targets, where you're getting those longer books, particularly the McCoys, and I think it really was that golden era of the books that I grew up with as a child, this would have seemed like quite a bigger deal than perhaps it does now.
No, I do remember the fanfare about this coming out. In terms of the haunted house scene, how did they sort of deal with that?
The haunted house scene is very similar. There's a lot of little knowing winks to the audience there, like it talks about Ian tripping over a photoelectric cell and that activating the Frankenstein monster sort of thing. Okay. Or like Barbara trips something up and then the Dracula robot comes out. So it's done very knowingly to the audience. The strange screaming lady is not in the book.
Oh, thank God.
Which is, whatever she's trying to say.
I don't know.
She's very
terrible.
Yeah, she's not in the book. But yeah, it's done in a much more knowing way than I think the TV version is.
Oh, excellent. I vaguely remember reading that at the time when it came out, but I had stronger memories of reading the Master Plan books as well than that one. But yeah, interesting.
So, moving on to the Pertwee era.
Yes, the Pertwee era. Yes, so my choice was Planet of the Daleks, a book I hadn't read in about 30-odd years, probably like the rest of us, to be perfectly honest with you. The first Doctor Who book I remember reading was actually Genesis of the Daleks, and I always found that a slog, but then again, I was 11 at the time, so anything was probably a slog than the books I was reading. Bit of context, Season 10 Pertwee is my second favourite season of Doctor Who in the Pertwee era. Really, really solid. It's the dreaded Pertwee 6-parter, right, where you got quite a lot of sag in the middle. However, for this adaptation, Terence really sort of pares it back, and it's just it's like a fan edit really of the story, where it's just really hitting those key points and the key scenes about the story. The characterisation of the characters are really good. Weber comes across, he's a bit of an arse, to be perfectly honest with you, than what he was on TV. Look, he's a bit of an arse on TV, but in this he's actually quite tiresome, I found. But look, in terms of Uncle Terence's embellishment of the story, he's still got time to actually, really sort of draw out a lot of those character motivations, where it's not like he's churning him out towards the end, where it's like a Destiny of the Daleks pamphlet, really, isn't it? Like he's just churning him out every month. He's actually got time to really
That's not the book with the least word count, though.
But this adaptation, he's just got a lot of heart into it. Like he's just got a time, to really sort of draw it all out. There's a couple of deviations from the story we all know and love. Like for example, like the coat that Jo wears when she leaves the TARDIS. It's an awful bloody yellow Mac or something like that in the TV show, where she wears a woolen coat, for example, in the book. Lots of devices, the TARDIS recorder, which I think is like a Gallifreyan USB stick. It sounds like, to be perfectly honest with you, it's got infinite power source, it's powered by atomic energy, and then the Thals are carrying stoves with them to heating up food with atomic power. I mean, they've got it's like Ghostbusters on their backpacks, you know what I mean? Like, lots of atomic power going on, Terence, for somebody, supposed to be quite, planet conscious and everything like that. Yeah, so basically, in terms of, deviations from the story, there's quite a few, but I'll just go through a couple of them there. At the end of the story where I do remember just going back to the TARDIS, well, in this case, what they've done is the Thals have given them some anti-fungus suits, almost like bubbles, those hazmat suits, really to go back to the TARDIS so they don't get squirted by the poison again. Webster, he removes his robes before releasing the virus, meaning which he's invisible at the time. The events of Frontier in Space. Now, if this was a new series thing where they had to flash back, you just hear castrati and all those cutting scenes and all sorts of stuff, where really the events of Frontier in Space are quite economically told, where it really sort of doesn't dwell on to a lot of, lots of cutting, exactly what happens. It's just like Joe's recounting what happened as a vote, in the voice recorder thing, which I think works quite well. There's not like little things at the bottom of the page saying, please refer to, the space Doctor Who in the Space War or anything like that. So it's actually quite economically told. The Spiridons, basically, he sort of mentions that they've actually got a bit more of a civilization that's collapsed, very similar to what happened with the Exelons.
Right.
So he draws on that quite a lot as well. The bombs that Weber then takes away to try and blow up the rest of the Dalek base. The whole way that Jo is knocked out when she finds those bombs originally, like it's a bit of polystyrene just falls on the back of her neck, where it's actually like, she's at the bottom of a crevice, as it were. There's a massive cliff on top. There's bits of stones coming down. All of a sudden, she gets whopped on the head, and then the countdown to those bombs going off is a lot more dramatic. So look, there's a few deviations from the actual televised story as per normal, but this is really like a greatest hits of that story again. It's really punchy. Terence did a fantastic job on it. The cover's really cool as well, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading this adaptation of Planet of the Daleks, which is one of my favourite Pertwee stories. Well done, Terence. This one's a good one.
It certainly has quite a reputation, Planet of the Daleks.
So definitely one to have a read of.
Oh, look. What's that up there on the scanner?
Hello everyone, this is Robert, recording from my mobile recording studio, i.e. my car. The noise in the background is no doubt the summer storm that's sweeping across Melbourne as I speak. Anyway, this is my contribution to the 42 to Doomsday 2022 Target Novelisation Book Club, with our special emphasis on Daleks. And of course, I've chosen Genesis of the Daleks. The Genesis of the Daleks novelisation opens with the following words: the place, Skaro; the time, the birth of the Daleks. After 1,000 years of futile war against the Thals, Davros has perfected the physical form that will carry his race into eternity, the dread Dalek. Without feeling, conscience, or pity, the Dalek is programmed to exterminate. At the command of the Time Lords, Doctor Who travels back through time in an effort to totally destroy this terrible menace of the future. But even the Doctor cannot always win. And it is that final sentence that reveals the true genius of Genesis of the Daleks, that even after the audience has been immersed in not one but two failing societies, been introduced to a host of memorable, at times loathsome characters, wrestled with complex moral and philosophical questions, and yet at the end of all that, the Doctor, despite his words about delaying the development of the Daleks and bringing together species that might otherwise have warred with each other, the Doctor fails. It's odd reading this story after so many years. A lot of Dix's writing tics are on display. You see him jam in the Doctor's backstory inside a paragraph, which made me lament the way the character's history during the new series has opened up in all sorts of strange and generally unpleasant ways. Do we need to know more about the Doctor's history with hiding in barns as a child, for instance? Do we need to know he was a child? Dix manages to overcome the clunkiness of that paragraph with its pure simplicity, which was really enjoyable to read. I love how Dix portrays Harry's quiet heroism and determination in the landmine scene. He's willing to stay by the Doctor and risk being blown apart, just to ensure his friend survives the experience. And he's a strong enough character, beneath all the bluff and badly timed jokes, to stand up to the Doctor's insistence he step away. I love Harry, and there should be more of that about. Dix is brutal in his depiction of the wave of attackers and defenders in the trenches near the Khaled Dome. Corpses propped up give the appearance of numbers, poison gas, Gween of course, the chatter of machine guns, and bodies falling left and right. It's not the cuddly Uncle Terry some may remember, but an accomplished storyteller who can convey mood and pace with an economy of words. Dix describing the Doctor as running across the battlefield like an ostrich is so evocative and hilarious. Teeth and curls? More like all arms and legs. Sarah awakening beneath a tangle of dead bodies would have to be one of the most grotesque set of words put to print in Doctor Who fiction. Dix has embraced the theme and the setting. This Skaro is a hellhole, a place of danger, with death around every corner. You wonder if the Time Lords were realistic about sending the Doctor on a mission such as this, and whether they wanted him dead more than they wanted the Daleks' development curtailed. Dix's ability as a writer is on full display here. He's taken the building blocks of nations, or was it Robert Holmes's scripts, and built them out to create a fully functioning world teetering on the edge of destruction. He allows us a glimpse into the minds of his characters. We hear Harry contemplate that death would be better than the fate Davros has devised for himself. Dix also knows how to pace the story, with Sarah and the Doctor/Harry segments conveyed in chunks of text long enough to garner your interest, but not so long that interest flags. These internal cliffhangers are designed to maintain the reader's interest, without forcing them to wade through pages and pages of text. A lot of people might think a Doctor Who novelisation is just a script in book form, but as we all know, it is the possibilities of conversion to a book that makes the novelisation so essential. While the television story relies on imagery to convey the story, The writer has to work harder to gain and hold the reader's attention, and it is that working harder that ensures a good novelisation lingers long in the memory. Dix doesn't deviate too much from the nation's/home script. On the page, it moves along incredibly briskly. One moment, Harry and the Doctor have escaped the bunker and the giant clam. The next, Ronson is being told they are meeting with high-level coloured government ministers. Sarah's and Severin's failed escape up the scaffolding around the Thal rocket is breathlessly told, with an economy of language that still makes you shiver along with Sarah when you realise exactly how high she is. While personally I would have loved a longer, more in-depth/expanded novelisation, as per the range at the end of its run, Genesis of the Daleks is still a strong example of the target books. The characters are clearly defined, Davros and Nyder remain one of the great double acts, and you have that almost but not quite success by the Doctor. I'll end by saying reading this book has inspired me to go back and listen to Big Finish's 4-part I, Davros series, which more fully fleshes out both the Khaled and Thal societies, Davros's place within it, and how a civilization committed suicide. And what more could you ask?
And now,
The moment you've all been waiting for.
the denouement. It is our annual Fanwank. Now, this is where we all come together as a collective group. We've obviously had a year's worth of Doctor Who, on and off the screen, really, to go through and just sort of think about things that have sort of troubled us, maybe. Just we question some of the things in terms of their authenticity and wankery. But Dave, have you got a Fanwank of the Year award for 2022 that you would like to read out for us, please?
Look, I have, and I thank you in your introduction for saying that these are things that sometimes trouble us.
Yes.
Because I've got one that I think is actually quite a serious one and is quite troubling. And look, this is very, very serious. As we all know, during the course of this year, we had the horrendous incident where Russia invaded Ukraine.
Yes.
Which is the first proper land war in Europe for a very long time. And you know, something we just didn't think was possible in the 2020s.
Yeah.
The reaction of a certain portion of Doctor Who fandom to these horrific events was to play the clip from the Zygon invasion,
Oh, God.
where the Doctor talks about how peace is the only way and you should never fight. Now, I always said that was a bit of a problematic little clip, and I always contrasted it to the much, I think, more substantive conversation that Ian has in the Daleks, where they debate about, you know, pacifism is important and looking for peace is important, but there are some things that you have to fight for.
Yeah.
And I would have thought that your country being invaded by Russia qualified as something that is worth fighting for. And for people to react to that with this just awful, saccharine, unthoughtful speech that basically is saying the Ukrainians should go, we won't fight, we'll just let Russia take us on. And really sort of dovetailed into that, I think, minority vibe in the public of, oh, well, we should negotiate with Putin, we should work out how to compromise and all this. How do you compromise away an invasion?
Yeah.
How do you say we'll give away a bit of our country? I think, you know, that's really quite appalling. And look, to their credit, a number of fans who did talk about that afterwards sort of said, actually, we sort of realised that wasn't the right reaction. And yes, these people should be fighting for their country, and the people who do need to leave, you know, is Russia. But I just thought, how out of tune do you have to be?
Correct.
To react to a really serious event and go, oh, I know how to react to the invasion of a sovereign country with a Doctor Who clip.
Yeah.
And, you know, that to me was just real fan wank. And look, it's a thing we discussed before, Mark, about these people who sort of take their life cues from Doctor Who now.
Yes.
And it's something I don't think we ever saw. Like, okay, you could look at a Doctor Who story and go, there's a really good message in there, you know, talking about oppressive taxation, or talk about fascist environmentalists, or talk about ecology, and you know, talk about, you know, peace and love, and you know, the mutants. It's a terrible story, but it's got a good message about racism. You know, you can take away a good message from it, but it's still just a fun show.
Yeah.
And I even saw the other day, somebody said, oh, you know, the Doctor gave a really problematic view on this topic in this story. I'm like, do you know that the Doctor's a fictional character? He probably doesn't have a view on the leadership of the Labour Party. Like, you know, I don't think he actually cares. He flies around time and space in a police box, guys. Yeah. Like, it's great to take some moral vibes from the show.
Correct.
But for God's sake, it's a piece of fiction.
Yeah.
Just
come out and say the leader looks very tired. Wouldn't that be how you...
Well, that's how they get rid of them these days, isn't it? Really?
And that's the other thing. Anytime we'll just say that they don't look tired, everyone's going to go, that's a really clever piece of political insight. No, it's not. So,
and every time they depose somebody, it's always like, don't they look tired, you know?
That to me was a very bad moment of Fanwank.
I mean, even that line at the end of, you know, Planet of the Daleks, where, you know, they talk, you know, Pertwee's talking about war.
don't aggrandise war.
Exactly. It's not thrown down your throat like it is in the new series. You know what I mean? Like,
there are some wonderful homilies in the Pertwee era. That one about glorifying war in the Planet of the Daleks is excellent. The one about human greed in Invasion of the Dinosaurs.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic little homily.
Yeah.
And even as a kid, you take away the meaning of that,
Yeah.
but you've still gone, I've had a great 6-part adventure with some dinosaurs.
Exactly right.
But it's all about just a tone and a vibe. It's very general. It's not about, well, and now here's the solution to climate change. You know, it's right. It's the one thing to talk about preserving our environment and ecology. That's a very important, strong message. But it doesn't need to be about. Not everything's about everything in the real world. Not everything relates to everything in the real world. Some things are just very general. They're not specific.
The nuance
is lost. They've lost that nuance of that distance.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem when something like Orphan 55. The homily wasn't a nice Barry Letts, John Pertwee homily. It was like something from the end of He-Man. Like, we've learned something.
That's exactly right. It's exactly... So, kids,
That's right, the community service announcement.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
what did we learn today?
We can exploit kids and sell them a whole bunch of toys, but there's a message at the end of it.
Yeah, exactly. Be good to the environment and don't buy plastic.
Right.
Yeah, so look, I'm not saying Doctor Who doesn't have important messages. Of course it does. Not everything in the real world relates to Doctor Who. And an invasion of a country, you could probably say, you know what? We don't need to bring Doctor Who into this one.
Probably these fans haven't seen those episodes of the classic series where they sort of talk about those issues, but they're done in a way where it's not castrati music. And I mean, Capaldi does a great performance, but the words coming out of his mouth are like, That's a really good observation, Dave. So thank you very much. I like that nomination. Richard, you got one here?
I actually chose a couple of comments from a well-known fan.
Oh, yes. Who's that?
Let's call him Ian.
Oh, yes. Hello, Ian.
Ian has contributed to our podcast before.
He has.
and I think actually blocked Rob on Twitter, I think, at one point.
I think everybody blocks Rob on Twitter.
And I have a couple of comments here from Ian, one of which says, I wish to state on the record, for once and for all, that I never, ever wanted to make Doctor in distress. I was forced and coerced into it. It's been an albatross around my neck for 37 years, and the trolls who use it as ammunition against me are just pig ignorant. I'm so sick of it. Do you reckon he also now disclaims any part of Attack of the Cybermen?
I was just going to say, you could apply that to the Attack of the Cybermen, the theme to Kanon and Company and everything like that. I mean, look, Ian doth protest a lot. Forced is probably a very strong word. Removal of perks, if he didn't do it, would have probably been the best turn of phrase I would have used. But Hans Zimmer did the music.
Look, I think that if Ian just laughed it off and just said, you know what, John asked me to do it as a personal favour, I know it's not great, let's all have a laugh, no one would care. It's because they know they can needle him about it that they do.
No. I mean, the lyrics are pretty good, aren't they, really? I mean, with a Yeti to shoot her or something.
There was a brigadier and a master.
Canine computer. Who's that doctor over there? It is appalling, Ian, and you should hang your head in shame.
It's got Justin Hayward, that's cool.
That's
exactly right. And Bobby G from Bucks Fizz, so there is some talent there.
It's got Justin Hayward in it.
We've got another one, Richard. This is a more
there is
recent
another one. This is
Ian.
one actually you sent me. I am deeply fearful for the future of any more Doctor Who animations. It is such a shame that The Crusade came out in the Season 2 collection box set without any animation whatsoever for the 2 missing episodes. But I understand there was simply no budget to animate them. Although Derek Handley's excellent recons told the story, I still would have wanted some animation. But Russell Minton's hard work in bringing out these crucial, essential tributes to the show's history must never ever be taken for granted, and never underestimated. I love them with all of my heart and my soul. There's lots of talk of crowdfunding, but I'm not certain it could be done practically. But the idea of Season 1 without an animated Marco Polo is an anathema to me. Similarly, Season 5 with a fully watchable version of Wheel in Space, made even more upsetting by the fact that they already animated part of the first episode. I want to see the animations back, even if we have to do them ourselves. Before you all jump down my throat and remind me of my past failures,
albatross around my neck, yes.
At least Mission to the Unknown looks superb. and certainly far superior to Web of Fear 3 and the spindly arms and legs of Fury from the Deep.
Yeah, fair enough.
And at least any animation that I would be involved in would not ever contain almost sacrilegious and egregious mistakes like that awful, inexcusable Padmasambhava. If you are recreating missing episodes, Gary Russell, you have no right to reinvent the stories to suit your mood. No, your duty is to be accurate to the missing originals. Fury from the Deep never had giant seaweed attacking the helicopter or starfish-like weed sitting on the victims' heads. You certainly never saw the original, so how dare you take it upon yourself to screw it up? Despite any animation being better than none at all, your interference in what was transmitted makes you the enemy of all Doctor Who fans who care for accuracy.
Actually, I thought his greatest crime was actually script editing The End of Time, but...
I thought it was performance in The Famous Five.
Oh, yes.
We need animations, but we need them done properly. Like the incredibly brilliant, perfect The Moonbase, which is still unsurpassed as the best Doctor Who animation ever made, to the extent that I no longer consider the story to be missing. There are a lot of very talented fan animators out there, and we are right now putting together a team to animate the Daleks master plan. I have a superb, wonderful artist in New Zealand who can draw every bit as stunningly as the Moonbase looked. It has to be done for love, because obviously there is no guarantee that the BBC will use it. But my fear is that if we don't do it, if we don't all team up, especially while those of us with a working knowledge of all the details of the transmissions are still around, then it will never ever get done. So my goal is to find contributors to help me animate all of the missing 24 episodes of Season 3, my all-time favourite season. If the quality is as good as Mission to the Unknown, then I hold out hope that the BBC will release it, knowing only too well that there are no guarantees. Whereas the Space Pirates, Wheel in Space and Marco Polo have to each be priorities to complete forthcoming box sets, Season 3 is likely to be the very last one. Imagine if we could complete Season 3 without treading on anybody's toes. It is my dream to achieve this within my lifetime. I have made it my life's mission to preserve the classic Doctor Who episodes. Many fans hate me, especially for my outspokenness. But if I had never been born, you'd be missing over 100 more episodes than the 97 already missing ones. Surely for that, and for nothing else, I deserve more respect and understanding than I ever received. Brother after that, yeah.
Oh, give a lie down, son. Lots to unpack there. If I'd never been born. Dave, your thoughts?
For all of the energy and passion in that email, there's nothing there that I'm particularly excited or worked up about.
No.
Look, would it be nice for those episodes to be animated? Of course it would. Do I understand that the cleaned up Blu-ray release of a piece of television from 1965 is not going to be a massive money spinner and the budget is accordingly limited? Of course I do. I think we're lucky for what we've got, and I just accept that. And yeah, like, fan entitlement is always a little bit wanky, isn't it?
From that screed, I heard the words I a lot, and hate. People hate me. Yeah.
Hate keeps me alive.
Hey, good luck with the master plan, Ian. Any more, Richard, or are you okay after that?
I'll get the oxygen bomb.
Yeah. Have to have a shower, Ace Ventura style.
No, I'm fine. I will actually say as one other piece of just short fanwankery, did we all buy the David Bradley TARDIS box set? Did we? Or?
No.
No. I know people who
Aaron,
have.
if you're listening, I'd be interested to know how well they sold.
I will ask him, actually. Get the stats.
What I want to see is when we get the Tim Treloar Pertwee set with...
Oh! Don't get me started. He's signing pictures of John Pertwee with his name on it. It's true. I saw it.
But to be fair, somebody walks up to you and says,
Yes,
please sign this. Do you say no?
You're my audio John Pertwee. Can you please, audio Third Doctor, can you please sign this for me?
It makes me uncomfortable. Obviously, the fan is not a real fan. Look, you're right, Dave. Look, you can get anything you want signed, that's fine. But to me, when I saw it, it was a picture of a publicity still from Inferno, and it had Tim Treloar's autograph on it. I'm going...
But isn't this a reflection of modern fandom as well? Because 20, 30 years ago, if somebody gave an actor a photo that wasn't them and they said, look, I'm actually not comfortable signing this, I'm not John Pertwee, I don't think that's right, can I sign something else for you? You know, you got an audio sleeve or something. And that would have been acceptable, whereas now all you need is one person to tweet, I met Tim Treloar and he refused to sign something for me. He's a bastard. And suddenly,
Yes.
hashtag cancelled Tim Treloar is trending. And it's just, I get why they go down
You've
the
got
easier
that going
path.
already, haven't you? No.
I get why they go down that easier path.
Dave, your insightfulness again pulls us back on the cliff, mate. So you're absolutely right there. It just made me slightly
Made of
uncomfortable.
his Big Finish stories or something there and just say, look, I won't sign that, but I will sign one of the audio sleeves
Look,
or
as
something.
Dave said though, you might have that thing where some kid's giving him a picture to sign, and he goes, you might get cancelled Barrowman style or what happened to Sophia Miles, where she didn't smile apparently, and something happened. And anyway. But enough of that. All right, so I have a few Fanwankers.
All right, let's go.
All right, so here we go. So basically, I'm calling this the More Spin in a Washing Machine Award. This goes to DWM, who are promoting their Doctor Who magazine special 62, the 2023 yearbook. This special issue of DWM celebrates the 13th Doctor's entire journey and looks back on an extraordinary 12 months. This is the bit that really stuck in my throat. The 13th Doctor's final adventures were among the most spectacular in the series' history.
No, they won't.
This was a time of transformation in more ways than one.
Look, Legend of the Sea Devils was mostly harmless.
It wasn't spectacular,
No,
though.
it wasn't spectacular.
Look, I would give it looked good, but once you get past that,
There's not much
no.
there.
No.
I mean, I wanted a pantomime murder, but, look,
We all did. And it was Evil the Daleks wasn't a great either. So, I think they're really pedal shit uphill there. So, the best rewriting of history, more than one line, goes to Showmasters in the UK, who, when promoting Jodie Whittaker's appearance at a signing event, said, in 2017, she made history as the 13th actor and first woman to play the Doctor in Doctor Who. She made her on-screen debut as a Doctor on December the 25th, 2017, in the episode titled Doctor Who Twice Upon a Time. Her casting was met with overwhelming acclaim and positivity. And in 2020, she was voted the second greatest Doctor in the programme's 57-year history, only losing narrowly to David Tennant. So, let's just unpack this again. Her casting was met with overwhelming acclaim and positivity.
well, I suppose they're hardly going to say, please come to an event where the casting of the lead actress caused a large amount of divisiveness. and hashtag not my doctor.
I think they would have just said, she made the history as the first female actor that played the role. And interesting. Overwhelming acclaim and positivity. I don't remember that at the time. Voted second greatest Doctor. Was that some sort of Radio Times poll where the Russian bots got involved or something like that? I can't remember.
I do vaguely remember that poll, and it was a very limited audience, and it would have been people who were sort of watching the current series.
Yeah, it was basically all entries open to 13 and under, and that was it. Yeah, so look,
it's not unusual that the incumbent Doctor is very popular and does well in those sort of
Well,
mainstream polls.
true. I mean, there was that year, look, it was Tom Baker, and then
Yes,
there was
and
that
McCoy.
year when Sylvester McCoy,
yes.
when I think it was when the New Adventures were really at their peak.
Yeah.
Look, I read that and I sort of, I know they're going to try and sell tickets, but really, okay. A Fanwank of the Year award ceremony wouldn't be complete without some Briggs finish.
I was wondering when we'd get the big finish, but yeah.
Briggs finish. So, there's so many to choose from, Richard. But I thought narrow it down to about 40
I
entries.
suppose we've already sunk the boot into Tim Treloar, so yeah,
Exactly.
let's go.
So, look, I've narrowed it down to about 40 potential entries. So, best misleading cover goes again to Briggs Finish for their release of All of Space and Time, which features Matt Smith on the cover, and in very, very small, tiny font at the top says starring Jacob Dubman. Now, I'm going to show that to Dave. There. How is that pretty small font to you? And a whole bunch of people I have no idea.
And it doesn't even say starring Jacob Dubman as the 11th Doctor.
No, it doesn't really, no. It's almost like, when you see PDS statements with lots of asterisks with very tiny... It's like that. It's almost like they're embarrassed of it. But
Your views may not necessarily match those of Globex Corporation.
Exactly. There should have been another title award goes again to Briggs Finish, who should have called their forthcomings The Worlds of Doctor Who. So basically they're bringing out Irani and Clyde.
Oh, yes,
release,
we did
right?
actually
We
talk
talked
about
about last
that.
year.
Yes,
So
we
they've
did.
announced they've announced the name of The Worlds of Doctor Who, Rani takes on the world, beyond Bannerman. What they should have called it was either Clyde and the Rani. You know I'm going to go to the next one. Rani and Clyde. That's all you had to do. Anyway. The Best Race and Resistance Awards again go to Briggs Finish for their third series of Torchwood. Amongst us, Part 1 featuring some familiar names in the cast, is what they're saying. Joining the previously announced Eve Miles as Gwen Cooper and Kai Owen as Reese Williams. There are more alien hunting escapades are Paul Clayton, Johnny Green, Alexander Riley and Samantha Burt as Orr. Now, did you notice anybody missing on that cast list there from a Torchwood?
There's someone missing out. I just can't put my finger on it.
Yeah, exactly right. I'm sure if we had an arrow, maybe we'd be able to, find out who it was. Yeah. So yeah. Poor old John. Yeah.
Poor John.
Yeah.
I'm not touching that one.
Unlike John, who did.
Hey!
All right, now the winner. For the second year in a row is Chris Chibnall. But this time, unlike my lashings of him regarding the Timeless Children, I'm awarding this for a good thing.
What do you left?
Apart from that, he not only brought back classic series companions with Mel Bush and Ian Bloody Chesterton after 170 years away from the program, he accomplished a feat that Moffat said he could never do and would never work. That was bringing back old classic actors into the program. Because Stephen Moffat said, no, you can't do it because it just would look silly and just wouldn't work. Well, Chris actually proved you very much wrong on that. Not only was their appearances done in a way that was done with love and care, but actually Chris wrote dialogue for David Bradley as the first Doctor. It almost sounded a little bit like him, and not Robo-Doc from the last times you vote for him, Stephen. Of course, Chris leveraged the Guardians of the Edge from serial Twitter blocker Paul Cornell. But along with the Davison and McCoy scenes alongside their respective companions, this was the best thing about that appalling episode. And again, the Cesar Romero of the Masters was, for me, the worst new series master ever. So congrats again, Chris, on the award. It's being shipped to the nearest job centre to near where you live. But given the whole country is on strike at the moment, you'll probably get it in about 2025 in your hands. So well done, Chris, and this time for a good thing.
It was a good thing. Look, it was Fanwank, but I enjoyed it.
Now, we asked for some correspondence from our three listeners, and luckily the Doctor Who show replied. You hear to that, Dave?
I've got
it's a vague memory here. Yeah. Hello, Rob. He basically says, Slabs of Jodie Farewell was pure fanwank. But we live in an age where half of fandom's being duped into the idea that as long as some scenes in a story can make you feel warm and fuzzy and nostalgic, previously important stuff like a plot doesn't matter anymore. Extraordinary and spot on. Totally agree with that one.
We have a comment here from Jed Sweeney, who's written, Fanwank of the Year has to be Power of the Doctor. However, I thought it to be, by and large, good fanwank, as it showed that you can get away with fanwank if you can write lines like the Master's Dalek plan. And they seem perfectly acceptable in the context of the story.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Jed. Let's have our third listener.
This is from Bernard, who says, the perennial Big Finish Award for Fanwank of the Year goes to Jodie's Regeneration episode. So, as I said earlier in our talk, a very strong fan consensus. Power of the Doctor was Fanwank, but we liked it.
For what it was. Excellent.
Hello everyone. Despite my curmudgeonly persona, I'm really a softie at heart. Cut me and I bleed caramel. But don't cut me, you perverts. Anyway, as a result, my Fanwank of the Year award for 2022 contains no implicit or explicit criticism this year. There is no Time Lord Victorious to poop all over, or yet another Big Finish effort to mix and match disparate elements into an indigestible lump of, well, whatever something like that would look like. No, this is a positive nomination. Now don't faint in the back row, okay? My nominee is Power of the Doctor. Well, an element of it, at least. While I did enjoy the episode, it's entertaining nonsense for sure. However, there are two specific instances, aside from seeing the god that is Paul McGann back as the Doctor. For the love of God, if RTD can't see the value in bringing McGann back, why the hell did RTD come back at all? That deserve nominations. Of course, I'm referring to seeing McCoy and Aldred together, and Davison and Fielding together. Those brief little vignettes, see, I know French, are deserving of being recognised. Now, we didn't need closure between the Doctors and their companions, but it was fantastic that we did. These emotional beats that Chibnall raked over, the lingering grief over Adric's death, and whatever caused the rupture between Ace and the Doctor, are something the show would never have had without the Virgin and BBC books from the 90s and the early 2000s. RTD didn't invent the idea of characters within the show having emotional depth and needs. It was fans writing during the so-called wilderness era who brought all that to the fore. So in some respects, Chibnall was acknowledging the efforts of writers like Cornell. The Third Doctor ain't a Tory, Paul, and Parkin, and Orman, still one of Australia's best science fiction writers, and Bloom, and Angelides, and Aranovich, floating along on those rivers of London pounds, eh? And Mortimer, and Peel, a fellow candy jar writer. Please buy Birds of Passage. I need the royalties to feed the budgie, or it gets it in the neck. And all the rest by giving those 4 characters a chance to share regrets and reconcile, all in front of adoring fans. As an addendum, in my head, I've worked out a way for the 6th Doctor and Perry to have similarly met, but let's stick that in the box marked Doctor Who Regrets. They'll nestle in nicely with all the missing episodes we don't have. So hats off to Mr. Chibnall. Your appearance on Open Air is forgiven.
And that was our 2022 Fanwank of the Year Awards. So thank you, Dave and Richard, for joining moi today on our annual staff Christmas party. Dave, again, thank you for hosting at Camp David. As usual, it's been a lot of fun and lots of laughs, bit of tears, bit of anger from you, Richard, again, reading out Channeling E in there. But again, guys, thank you both and wish you all the best for Christmas and the New Year.
Thanks for having us on a couple of times this year. It's always fun.
It's always fun, yes. And guess what?
What?
Next year is our 10th anniversary. We've been going at this for 10 years.
You have.
We've come a long way from the days when Richard and I had to write all the mail for you.
Yes, I miss those days. We'll be back in the new year.
With stuff.
With stuff. Doctor Who stuff. Rob and I will be back in the new year. And, of course, with a plethora of guests during the year as well, including, I'm sure, you blokes.
Looking forward to that
I can't wait.
10th anniversary special, the 3 podcasters.
Oh, yes. The Dandy, the Clown, and the Angry One. On that bombshell, I've been Mark.
I've been Dave.
I'm Richard.
Keep punching!
Santa in the balls.
Chris Chibnall in the balls.
You've just listened to another episode of 42 to Doomsday, the podcast that loves talking about Doctor Who. We'd love to hear from our listeners. Please drop us a line at 42todoomsday@gmail.com. We can be reached at facebook.com/42todoomsday. If brevity is your game, we can be found on Twitter at 42todoomsday. Please check out our blog, 42todoomsday.wordpress.com, where Mark and I occasionally have something interesting to say. Aside from iTunes, you can listen to us via Stitcher and Player FM. If you enjoyed listening to us, leave a review on iTunes. As always, thank you for listening. Have a great week. We'll speak with you again soon.
And welcome, everyone. I'm actually in Aaron's Collectibles with the aforementioned Aaron. Aaron, how are you today?
Good, Mark. How are you?
Just a quick question for you. You just had an influx of new figures. What has been the biggest seller?
Well, surprisingly, we sold out of the David Bradley TARDIS set, and we ordered another lot, and that's all but sold out but one as well.
And how many of the initial order did you do? 3, 4?
10, and then we've got another 5, and that's in a couple of days they've sold out.
Okay, and the other ones in the ranges, how are they all fared?
The Genesis set's just about sold out. Destiny set's just about sold out. Jodie Whittaker set's...
Not shifting?
Oh, people love that Weeping Angel.
Oh, okay, right.
But not as much as the other ones.
Thank you, Aaron, for that. I've been Mark.
And I've been Aaron.
I've been Rob, just watching from the background.